Thank you. Welcome. So, a lot of familiar faces in the room today, and I hope that I can teach some of you that we work with regularly a little something, but you probably already know what we're going to say, so just bear with us. But hopefully the rest of you will learn a little something from the maintenance perspective. As Becky said, I am Carly Copeland. I'm the chief of the Stormwater Management Branch, and I kind of voluntold John that he was going to help me present today. When Becky contacted me, I think in December, to say, hey, we've had a lot of interest in maintenance. Can you guys come out and give a talk? I said, sure. And then we had a torrential year of rain and a lot of maintenance issues popped up. And I said, well, let me call Becky back and tell her no. And she was persistent, and she got us nailed down for June. So here we are. She was very enthusiastic to tell us that this was one of the largest classes to date this year, and I just heard her also say this is the last class of the semester, so I'm wondering which one it is. Is it maintenance, or is it because it's the last class of the semester? So that's okay. Hopefully, John and I are not educators. We are not adult educators. We are just operations and maintenance staff for a large municipality, so hopefully this class will come across helpful. We put a lot of time into it, and thanks for having us.
And you'll notice when she read our biographies, we were also not engineers.
Yeah.
So, we come from different backgrounds, and your expertise and your knowledge, is welcome in the conversation here. I'd like to make sure that you all know that this will be a back and forth. You all certainly know some things we don't, but we're hoping to kind of take you all and have everyone put your head in the maintenance world, the maintenance side of things, and step aside from the design and development and think about how these facilities, stormwater facilities, BMPs, are going to be handled in the future, and how easy or not easy that will be. Yep.
Yeah, I think as John said, the designers have maybe a year or two. I don't know what your schedules typically are, designing these facilities, and then you get another year or two constructing it. But we live with it forever, and so we have a lot of experience with longevity and life cycle and what to do and what not to do. So hopefully that'll come across today. Just by show of hands, are there any operators in the room? Is anybody here on the operations side? Oh, yeah, well, that's good. I was thinking maybe there'd be at least one or two of you, but okay, so hopefully this will be very helpful. And I guess we'll go ahead and get started. So our agenda is going to be talking about the Maintenance and Stormwater Management Division, and I'm sure after traveling all over the country that our program is not unique. It is replicated in other municipalities around the country. Loudoun County is a large representative in this room today. I work very closely with Chris Stone. He's an implementer on that side. Arlington County, Montgomery County, other regional partners. So we'll give you a little taste of us, what we're dealing with, and that kind of sets the stage for other municipalities. Why we're here, we'll talk about some of the universal rules for what are universal rules for designing and constructing these types of assets. We'll go over some of the most common facility assets that end up having problems, and then we'll dive into case studies. And somewhere along the way, we're going to sprinkle in a little exercise because we needed to do something for you guys to build the time.
Keep it as lively as possible.
But you're also going to have to put on your maintenance hat, so it'll be interesting to see how this whole thing plays out. So Fairfax County, we're 400 square miles. We have about 30 watersheds. We are within the Chesapeake Bay watershed, so we are required to comply with the Chesapeake Bay TMDL. We have about 1.1 million residents, and we're a Phase 1 MS4 community. We do not own right-of-way in Fairfax County, so I guess from a Northern Virginia perspective, that is not unique, but the rest of the state, it is unique. And you can see here, this is our budget, and so we have probably about $72 million coming in for FY20, and that's funded through a stormwater service district, which is a tax. We are not a utility. And that has seemed to do well for us, as you can see over time. Obviously, if the market does go south, we are at risk of, the funding going down. But for now, we're doing really well. And then for the group that I run, and this is our maintenance and stormwater management group. This is a couple years old, but it's a very diverse group of engineers, technicians, we have laborers, we have ecologists, we have all sorts of folks that help make sure that all of these assets within the county, including conveyance, are maintained according to the original design. So you guys are all local, but when we go and take our talk on the road, we like to set the stage for folks to understand kind of what Fairfax County has gone through, and especially Loudon, because I live in Loudon and it's a zoo right now. But this is, what, 10 years ago, John?
I think it's like 30 years ago.
Oh, 30 years ago. Okay. Well, Loudon, it would be 10 or 15. We've doubled in population. So this is about 30 years ago. I don't know where this is.
Dulles Toll Road.
Okay. And now this is today. So as you can imagine, there are a ton of assets that have been constructed within this urban area, and we are now responsible for ensuring that they live a nice long life, whether it's us maintaining it or the private industry maintaining it. So quick history of the evolution of stormwater within the county. So after World War II and the expansion of the federal government in the 1950s, population began to boom. And so you'll see where we began to build a lot of infrastructure, pipes, we had channels, those types of infrastructure. And then in 1973, the Clean Water Act was passed, and we began to obviously design for flood control. And then in the early 80s, the county's very first BMP was implemented, and that was to protect the Occoquan Reservoir. And then the county expanded that BMP concept countywide in the early 90s. And then here we are today. And in the 2000s, we started seeing the advent of green infrastructure, or LID, you know, what you want to call it. And now today, that's a tremendous focus, obviously, since the passage of the state stormwater regulations in 2014. So the county's storm drainage system is a interconnected network of catch basins and pipes and channels. And sometimes those channels lead directly to a stream, but sometimes they are intercepted by things that we maintain, and that would be ponds or sand filters, or you name it, we maintain it. And as you all know, as urbanization increases, non-point source pollution increases, and downstream flooding is an issue. So we maintain facilities that are built for the purposes of both quantity and quality improvements. So some facilities are designed only to reduce the volume or the peak flow. So those are typically our dry ponds. I think some undergrounds are designed that way. We have some trenches that were quantity facilities. But with the passage of the 2014 stormwater regulations and the subsequent passage of the county's stormwater ordinance, the focus is, as you all know, on green infrastructure. And so you'll see as we get further into talking about what our inventory looks like, that those numbers are just astronomical. I don't think we need to spend too much time on what water quantity facilities are versus what water quality facilities are, because you guys are the ones that actually design and size and choose those types of facilities. But we have facilities in our inventory that serve either one or both of those purposes. And BMPs, yeah, BMPs, obviously, that's the main driver of a lot of designs these days. And part of it has to do with the Chesapeake Bay TMDL. Some of it has to do with local TMDLs. But it's certainly what we see as the primary inventory additions here lately. But we have, dry ponds that are being retrofitted into enhanced facilities. So they're taking peak shavers and they're slapping a BMP plate on it. They're adding some maintenance features to it and calling that an enhanced pond. And then, as I said, we at Maintenance and Stormwater manage the collection, conveyance, and management aspects of the storm drainage network. So the top photo is the collection point, and then the conveyance is the channels and open channels and pipes. That is a section of maintenance that is performed by another branch within our group, and so we do not, from our floor, maintain any of those types of structures. That's all done by our infrastructure branch within maintenance, and Malik actually used to work there. We are strictly management, so we only handle facilities. And as you all know, what the drivers of our program are: Clean Water Act, Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act, the Virginia Stormwater Management Act. A big driver for us within the county DPW is the Chesapeake Bay Team. We dedicate a lot of money every year towards complying with that mandate, and we're actually seeing really good numbers regarding compliance. So within our inventory, we have over 20 different types of facilities. And I was going to highlight or change the color.
They're highlighted. It's just kind of hard to see. If you click next. It's blue.
Oh, it's blue. I see it now. Okay.
You can't really tell in here.
There you go. Yeah, we had talked about doing that. So we have a very large inventory, and so we had to come up with some sort of alphanumeric naming scheme to keep up with all the facilities. And so you'll see the AS, the BR, the CS, the DP. That represents the type of facility, and then we have a number, and that number is either going to be before or after the numeric, the alpha character, depending on whether or not it's maintained by the public or it's maintained by the private entities. And so just if you're exploring county's GIS system and you come across an ID like that, you'll kind of have a better understanding of what it actually means. But today we'll talk a little bit about bioretention, cisterns, and we'll go over some issues associated with each of these. Ponds, both wet and dry, green roofs, and permeable pavers. And so this is kind of a representation of what we see as far as private facilities. We have about 4,600 facilities in our inventory that we're responsible for ensuring maintenance of. So we go out once every 5 years, we inspect these facilities, we give them 135 days to perform the work, and if they don't perform that work, we will send them over to our code compliance team at Land Development Services, and they will initiate some sort of enforcement action, whatever they deem necessary. But you can see the makeup of the private facilities is pretty diverse. I mean, the chart is pretty colorful, and it's cut in a lot of ways, but you'll notice on the next slide how the public inventory differs. But the majority of the types of facilities that you find in there are trenches, bioretention, underground, dry pond, and rooftop. And rooftop is not something I've seen even constructed since like the mid-'80s, but we have about 900, I think, rooftop detention facilities in our inventory, and it's not a green roof. It's not a blue roof. It is just strictly a rooftop detention facility. And it is in the PFM, and it does comply with detention requirements. But it's a terrible idea, so don't build those. Don't design them, and don't even suggest it. A lot of issues that come with those, like detaining 3 inches of water on a rooftop for a Verizon data center is probably not the best idea for Verizon insurance underwriting. And storage units, we've seen them on storage units, insurance is not going to insure damage should something happen. So you got to think about this thing. Think about it. Some engineers in the 80s thought that was a great idea. Chuck, was that you? Some engineers in the 80s thought it was a brilliant idea, and I see the benefits of not taking up additional land, but it's not a good idea, so don't do it. And then, what are these? Oh, So the dominant type of plan that's coming into the inventory is from infill development. John Bentusic's back there from LDS, and he can attest to the amount of infills that we're seeing in the county. But the two primary types of facilities are bioretention, that's about 30%, and trenches dominate at about 70%. Folks don't like either one. So, if you are doing infill plans, just keep in mind that folks want their land. They don't want to encumber their land. They don't want to lose their grassy space. If they have children, they want to be able to run back and forth along the lawn without tripping over stone or having a big depression of planting area in their yard. So it's not popular with the owners in the private inventory, but it is a necessity. And so I know that there's a whole work group that's been established. It's the localized flooding work group, and they're trying to come up with ideas to streamline infill development facilities that come into our inventory. And then this is a representation of the public inventory. So you'll see here that dry ponds dominate, and that is because the PFM says that Fairfax County will maintain dry ponds within residential areas. We will also maintain wet regional facilities. And I can tell you we're not seeing very many dry ponds or wet regionals coming into the inventory anymore. But we are getting much more diverse. So even 5 years ago, the remainder of those slices did not even look that diverse. So with the retrofits and with like our capital facilities group doing more libraries and fire station retrofits and things like that, they're implementing different types of facilities that we are now responsible for maintaining. And John will talk about a few of the lessons learned with bioretention, porous pavement, and even ponds. So some of the trends that we're seeing in our inventory, the variety is changing. I think I made that pretty clear, and the graph showed that. We're seeing a lot of change in regards to what LDS allows. So a good example would be a dry pond is now replaced with an underground, and there's a multi-story parking garage on top. Land is pretty valuable, so we're seeing a shift from these above ground facilities to below ground. And that's primarily, and the quality aspects primarily being achieved through manufactured devices. So, as I said, dry ponds dominated. Now only about 2/3 of our inventory are ponds, and so we're learning. We're learning how to maintain. Folks are learning how to construct. And infill is through the roof. It's grown exponentially, especially since the stormwater ordinance was passed in 2014. It's just through the roof. Yeah, so as I mentioned about the dry pond example and the underground replacement, we're constantly taking facilities offline, replacing them with others, but it's still growing and growing. And you can see that in the numbers. So in FY18, we were up to about 6,600 facilities. And so if you look at the blue bar, that's total, public and private. And if you look at the orange, that's just the private, and gray is just the public. But you can see that we are growing leaps and bounds every single year, and we're being asked to do more. We're not getting more staff for it, so we're having to get a little creative with how we achieve maintenance and provide a level of service consistent with the constituents within the county. We're one of the top 10 richest counties in the country, along with Loudoun, and the expectations are high. And almost everybody that lives by a facility works from home. It's a miracle. So, it's tough. It's tough. Levels of service are always being stretched. And this is just kind of a breakdown of the various types if you were to categorize them and put them into a bucket of a category. So this is a little bit misleading because I recognize this is an old slide, but this 2017 red bar is it doesn't look like it is significant. It makes you ask the question, why did the inventory go down? But it didn't. It was just that we made this chart in the middle of the year. And so this number is actually a lot higher than you're seeing here. But the point of the slide is to show that green infrastructure or LIDs are growing leaps and bounds compared to other types of facilities in our inventory. So, and you can see that actually non-ponds, meaning undergrounds, manufactured proprietary devices, sand filters, those types of facilities, they're actually growing over ponds as well. So ponds are kind of a thing of the past unless you're retrofitting. Especially if it's on a commercial lot or, you know, if it's an out parcel, then that's one thing in a community, but commercial areas are being completely changed.
Okay, so nothing conveys group projects like a 10-year-old meme, right? We do have an activity that we're going to be doing today to kind of project the energy I'm getting from this cup of coffee to the entire room. Carly and I were at a conference in Milwaukee where we did a lot of we had a lot of opportunities to put our heads together with people from all over the country regarding green infrastructure. And there's also an opportunity for the whole conference to vote on future actions where we want to take these meet and greets and put our heads together and move forward. And the one topic that was the most popular was maintenance. So as you can see with our program, there are a ton of facilities that we are actively maintaining, and the forecast really shows that we'll be having a lot more in our future. And it seems like that is kind of the mindset for the country and Canada as well, based on what we saw at the conference. But I got back from my flight at midnight last night, so I am like running 90% on coffee. So if I'm going too fast or I'm not making sense or tell me to slow down, that's cool. But I want to kind of keep things moving here for you all. So what I'm going to do is we're going to go through that classic thing where everyone counts off a number because we're going to break up into groups. And again, remember, Carly and I are not engineers, but I'm going to ask you all to kind of, for a second, approach a project that we did in Fairfax County as if you weren't as well. So we have plan sets and a bunch of documents for a awesome new facility we have in the county called the Public Safety Headquarters. It's an amazing complex full of all different types of green infrastructure that is being showcased here. It's right by our Fairfax County Government Center. It was a huge endeavor, and we have lots of awesome facilities as a result. But just like any project in Fairfax County or nationwide or in your jurisdictions, you tend to learn a little bit something new every time. And we had a lot of opportunity to learn things about our facilities, about the way we do construction, the way we select facilities, and the way our county engineers, county planners interact with private agencies and consultants and things like that. So what we're going to do is we are going to put our heads together and we are going to approach the design and construction of these LIDs, green infrastructure, from the point of view of a maintenance contractor or a maintenance worker like myself. So we're going to count off to 8 total. So we're just going to start here and remember your number.
4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 6, 7, 8,
1.
9.
No, 1.
Maybe you all need some coffee.
4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2.
All right, cool. That was relatively painless. 9s. I heard some 9s. I'm watching you. Okay, so groups 1 and 2, we're going to basically split up into different sections of the room. So we don't really need a table for this, but make sure you grab the paperwork that's in front of you. We have some prompts here. These are not quiz questions. There are no wrong answers. But 1 and 2, I want you grouping up. 1 and 2, you'll be looking at the green roofs. Groups 3 and 4, you'll be looking at the vegetated swales. 5 and 6, fire retentions. 7 and 8, you're going to be looking at the pervious pavers. Again, we have some simple plans in front of you, and you can glean what you can from those. But if you go to the back table here, we've got a bunch of other stuff, including oblique photography, one per group, so you can send a representative or just come back here and swarm the table and grab what you need. We also have some selected portions of the plan set for this facility, and it's a big plan set, so also one of these per group. And in addition to that, we have 2 complete plan sets for this facility. They're small, trying to save some trees. You may not need this plan set, but if you really want to dig in and have a question about something and my limited plan review ability didn't pull out what you needed, feel free to comb through these as well. But these are going to stay on the table. These will be our reference documents. So go ahead and split up into your groups, and if you need some reminders about what facilities you're looking at yet, I'll shout them out again once you're all grouped up. Yeah, we can do 1 through 4 on this side, and I'm sorry, 1 through 4 on this side, 5 through 8 on this side. I'll let you all decide how you want to separate yourselves.
Real clear.
All right, let's see.
I have questions.
These are the prompts. Yep.
There's too many of us to get separate us all as easily as possible.
I'm a 6.
I'm gonna let them figure this part out. There's too many people. I'm gonna be moving folks around.
5 and 6 work together.
5 and 6 together, or 5 and 6?
Oh yeah.
Makes sense.
Hi, Ed. How are you?
I'm good, Charlie.
Good to see you.
I've been up to 2:30.
Okay.
Ah, why?
Helping with the high school graduation. They have an all-night graduation party.
Oh, wow.
Not anybody graduated.
Good for you.
They have like.
But you have what, 5 boys?
Juniors.
All right. So again,
So that the other parents didn't have
groups
to
1 and
do
2. You'll be looking at green roofs. Do 1 and 2 green roofs. 3 and 4, vegetated swales. 5 and 6, bioretentions. 7 and 8, pervious pavers. 1 and 2 for green roofs.
Nice to meet you. John, guys.
Okay, so you got all this.
The hard part.
All right. Does anyone need any help? Are we all squared away? Still trying to find our groups? 1, 2. Okay. So this is a pretty. Oh, go ahead. So it's a pretty simple project. There are no wrong answers. Again, this is just an opportunity to put yourself in the mindset of a maintenance worker or maintenance engineer, as the case may be. And we're going to go through each of these 4 prompts independently with your groups. And then we're going to reconvene and discuss what we found, similarities with our other green infrastructure, and the differences.
No, we just pretty much back. Okay, just got to answer the 4 questions.
No, one of the things that is about this facility is that it's a senior site. Yeah, it goes 14 to 20.
Years I've been working in that building, in between the parking garages.
I know exactly what you're talking about, yep. Oh, is there a name on the plan? He was just remarking about that. So this is the parking garage at Harity, that hill.
Mm-hmm.
How unstable as it is.
Oh, yeah, well, that's a good point. I'm glad you pointed it out.
Inspections, and a lot of the controls are gone. So they're not detaining anything.
These are good pictures, huh? those are in our GIS oblique imagery.
Is everything picked up?
They're mid-construction, but
I mean, we have under drains because we're on clay, just like everybody. You know what, very little runs off. Yeah.
Sediment.
I mean, they just still just bio. How much is infiltrating, how much is being held?
This is your pen, I'm putting it in my mouth.
that's okay. Well, as long it's probably been in, yeah, see,
It's already been.
you know, I didn't do that. So that was somebody else who did that. So this is like
We're like totally sharing.
gross.
I'm gonna go put it down and get my
Yeah,
own.
like yeah,
How bad?
I don't mangle them quite that bad. Someone else did that. I don't know where I found it. It must have been around the office.
Those are maintenance requirements. Often all this maintenance requirements.
I'll probably give him. It's good. I'll probably give him. I'm gonna gauge. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Kind of gauge how everyone's doing, but it seems like we got some folks who are working well together, putting their heads together. So I don't want to discourage that for sure. I think 4:15 would be good. See how they're feeling.
This always seems to do pretty good. I think you have to put money in.
That's maybe good question too.
Yeah, it's good. I'll probably ask them each to send a victim up to the front to sum up what they found.
So since you're writing down, the one on the west is behind a parking garage, so access might be tricky to get it all the way back there. And then there's a fence running around here, and part of the facilities are like in the secure facilities, so they have to get access.
Too much of an engineer. Yeah.
So they might need grass.
This is an intended use area.
Yes, I would say that's probably not a complete facility.
They should use.
So there's a fence and
So the environmental.
restricted
Failed
area.
membrane.
Get a lot of mud and dirt in here during access.
Use of the area around the
So we can have a media.
facility, everything around the facility. How does that impact your maintenance?
They do have a main walk with, I'll say plaza between the building and the. We're on the definitely traffic coming down.
I'll call you now.
Then in here,
I'm gonna go outside and call Aaron real quick.
Okay.
Gotta coordinate the access. We decided we were gonna think like maybe stuff.
WDC recently worked on that, now with the issue of the architect.
Before they gave us all. It might be in the main, I didn't boilerplate them out of the BMP. Well, access obviously.
It's not stuff to haul it away, I mean, you need.
It's one crack or whatever.
Off-site disposal. Disposal of anything.
is that Marshall too?
That's at the outpost.
Strategic location of some kind of maintenance
Aspect of construction that could impact the stabilize before completing this, or else they're gonna have to keep cleaning it out.
That's the last one. What other maintenance? At some point.
The area around the roof is just gonna be.
I'm guessing that's not.
I'm just thinking now, like in the city, you gotta look at lighting and maintenance of that is gonna be different in urban areas. Say you got a one-story building with a roof, but now you got a five-story building.
How y'all doing? Good.
Thank for this next one.
Halfway through. Awesome.
The upstream areas to stabilize.
So all this new development, like in Tyson, you had one or two stories.
May have been what happened. I think. They ran over some buildings, packed all the.
There already, they come around.
Sometimes when they have to stack it.
Turn out,
and then rush back.
Yeah, but remember, they do have pavers though that will pass water.
Like a porous paver?
You know, the brick itself will pass water pretty quickly.
Like a porous paver.
Right.
The plants have to be refreshed.
Was it like black clay or something in there?
Well, they were allowed to
How does it show it works by the joints or the? So it's literally just got clogged. And then they all, like I said, it's not.
Didn't have all the notes.
Well, another
Put it up
example.
for free. Aspects of site construction could impact.
Through some plants and mulch and.
Have all the mud
then-
finished.
This was built like.
Yeah, it's,
Well,
so it looks like, yeah. Starts here, towards the end, it's like where it goes up to the big
Oh,
pond.
they have under drains.
Yeah.
Yeah. Heavy equipment.
Okay, so
Are they wrapped in it?
The big spaces, so.
All right, let's shoot for being on around question 3. And in advance, prepare to send a victim up to the front to present your findings.
Well, other thing, the big issue is you go to that, the two different 6 inch, 4 to 6 inch layer, and then the other, what those two categories of green roofs are.
I think they're talking about the site around your BMP, like if it's all disturbed and your BMP and you didn't stabilize it, that's what they're talking
I'm
about
just
there.
thinking about, I'm thinking about an 18 inch and 20.
County don't make it in any group. They got that rooftop to tents. You ever design any of it? Sound like a crazy idea.
Construction, if they don't do the
But
underground,
I'm thinking the same thing like you know about the weight. If you have that small layer, 6 inches of soil on the top of a 5-story building. If you go to the level 2, like
Check cleanouts for
18 inches of soil,
maybe they over excavate,
all the way down to ground level.
create sumps.
Cost of the building, depending on what level you put on that green roof. If you just put a 6 inch and it'll cover your BMP requirements, that's structural.
What kind of maintenance problems do you see as design?
Grass swale.
So this is how much? 3 inches of mulch.
I always first start from that, I said, man,
Ensuring proper construction.
Sod to hold with 12-inch landscaping pins around the entire load.
Some of our favorites.
Sod and mulch.
That impacts.
Float away.
Yeah.
So it looks like you guys have already grouped up in by your attention, particularly like groups 1 and 2 are already together, 3 and 4 are already together. If you haven't already like powwowed with your co-group, do so now. But I think you guys already did it, so preaching the choir here.
I just said ensuring proper construction.
No, it doesn't say.
Front kind of maintenance, preventive.
But it wasn't installed on the.
No, it's say mulch.
Inspection.
Well, I'm talking about just building insurance, just car insurance. Probably would be tough.
Sounds good.
Insurance goes up.
Good side, you can just fix it in spots.
That's the first time it leaks.
Uh-huh.
So I'm thinking of all those little warehouses that they put that stuff on in little old commercial buildings, you know, they gotta be, maybe they don't allow, insurance, they don't pay for no damage.
Oh, yeah.
Also, a maintenance problem is,
Must be
do we foresee with our type of BMP, there would be insurance costs.
That's what it says. I don't know how does it connect to maintenance?
How often you may inspect
Maintenance
it,
would be
they
replacing
damage.
maintenance would be replacing the plants that died, it's a part of the green.
Topsoil,
Plants, they-
organic compost, and sand.
I think it's grass, because it's
Yeah.
got here stormwater plug mix.
Yeah.
Stormwater plug mix.
All right, let's try and wrap up in the next couple minutes. And don't forget to choose a victim to come talk about what you all found.
The biggest thing is if it's not draining, right? Soil testing.
Riprap displacement, overgrown grass vegetation, could do vegetation dying too.
That's not.
I don't remember that being on their inspection.
When she mentioned that, that first thing I thought.
I'm thinking like an issue.
And there could be like too
gotta
high
build
on
access.
velocities and just general
Sometimes we
erosion
have to
in
take a
general.
ladder up.
Yeah.
Outside on the ocean.
That'd kill vegetation too, right?
Yeah.
Or some they have a fire ladder, yeah, that's what.
I did build a ladder up through the roof, access into the roof to look at the drainage.
All that vegetation.
The cup detention wasn't working, we wanted to know a solution. So that was, I had it calm, the schedule. Somebody make a sound up in the building, escort me up on the roof to that little trap door. Take photographs.
We actually got on a green roof. Inspecting the green roof.
So there's not many in private inventory? There's not many green roofs, no. There's tons of rooftops.
Oh, yeah, there's plenty of that.
Yeah.
We'll be there tomorrow. Have to have the last ball.
Yeah, about the truck. Yeah, so, yeah, we do inspect green roofs. You just haven't had any come across your plate? Yeah.
All the cleaner ups, paint it black, certain purpose.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's wrap it up.
Blend in maybe.
And if you haven't finished your worksheet, that's okay. We have plenty of time to brainstorm about this for the rest of the session. So you all can head back to your seats. Make sure you've got a volunteer who wants to talk, who's feeling active.
No, I don't think they do that.
Whoever looks like they're falling asleep, send them up to the front to talk. Then I'll take their place.
I'm gonna need some coffee.
No, they don't. There might be a vending machine, though. Hey, I don't blame you.
You betcha.
Does anybody need a break? How y'all feeling? Good? All right, keep on rolling. If you need to take a break or whatever, we have one built in, but I'm not going to be upset if you just walk on out. I'm not going to embarrass you or anything. All right. So groups 1 and 2, you all put your heads together about green roofs. Do you want to send the victim up here to talk about what you found? And we'll hash it out amongst the group to see what similarities and differences we have between our facilities. I'm guessing there's going to be some commonalities.
You got your list, Chuck?
Chuck, come on up and.
All right, so we don't have them all pictured here, but you can see our raindrops represent our BMPs. And let's go through our prompts one by one. And we're not going to take too much time with this, but I'm really curious what you all found because I can't approach this as an engineer. I don't have formal engineer's training, but I have seen what goes wrong with these facilities. I have seen what some of our struggles are. I've seen when these facilities go right, and there are certainly a lot of those in the county, including a lot at this facility as well. But like I said, we learn a little bit every time we maintain one of these sites. So our first prompt is, what are the typical maintenance requirements for your BMP, and how often will they occur? What type of equipment is used?
We had the green roof, so I think the first thing I had down there was the inspection of the green roof. And that should be often, you know, because if you didn't install it properly, or you have problems with the membrane, the older it gets, you know, you could also run into some leakage problems and have to reconstruct some stuff there. But obviously, you got to have good access to do your inspections and your maintenance. And that's not only on the roof, but from the ground up. You know, if you do have some significant repairs, or you know, you might have to work from the ground with a lift versus just being up on the roof with hand tools and things like that. You know, basically, you got to do a lot of maintenance on your plants. The older your roof gets, the more maintenance your plant's going to require. And obviously, you got to keep the drains from clogging and keep it running so that it's draining properly. So I had a gardener and labor and hand equipment.
All right, so does that sound familiar from what some of you all found for your other types of facilities? Group 1 and 2, about the same. So I think as we go on, there's gonna be some trends we're gonna see with these facilities, even among different types of facilities. So they might not all have plants, but we talked about inspections, we talked about maintenance and access, and then making sure those drains are clear. So pretty basic stuff. It's what we do on a day-to-day basis, but it is important. All right, you wanna go on number 2? So how could the conditions and intended use of the area around your BMP impact its construction and maintenance?
Found that a little difficult on the roof, but
Yeah, very good.
it's built last, obviously, the building's gonna be built up.
Well, that's good.
So things around it aren't too problematic, but sometimes the roof drains leading into them, you know, if they're not properly splashed or brought in, you know, it could do some damage to your plants and your filter. Failed membrane leads to greater maintenance costs and repairs. You could run into some drought years, but we haven't seen one of those in a while. Keeping your plants alive, keeping them watered. I said access and staging from below needs to be available.
What was that last one? Sorry.
Access and staging from below needs to be available.
Okay.
And I thought maybe on some of the older green roofs, if all this redevelopment we're seeing, like Tyson's and everything, if they're putting up them 100-story buildings or whatever, and around you, and it could lead to some light issues there too.
Oh, that's good. So you'll notice that light issues, shading. Yeah. So as you all were working through this exercise, you may have found that the necessary materials for some of the questions or thoughts you had may have not been available, or may have been limited in scope, or limited in the plan set. And I want you all to just keep in mind that when these facilities come to the maintenance side of things, this is basically what we're working with, more or less. So sometimes we rely on our familiarity with this type of facility, but more often than not, we're looking at those plan sets to make sure that any of the specifics related to the maintenance of those facilities are present. So definitely something to think about. Also, a lot of these questions get at things that may not be represented completely in the plan set as well. So something to think about there too.
I think I mentioned, I don't know if it falls in there, about those two categories. Green roofs have like 6-inch thick soil and then goes up to like 18-inch. So
intensive, extensive.
6 inches or maybe 18 inches won't be a difference. But if you have that building there and you're trying to get 18 inches of soil, that whole structure all the way to the basement has to be over-designed for that one level at the top. So
right.
Depending on the height of your building, depending on what category of being.
Be able to get up there, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So the top roof is not BMP?
Not the very, very top.
Well, it is the little membrane under the dirt, actual.
On the very top floor.
Oh, I see on that, I got you.
Yeah, that's
The
probably
green
there.
one.
Yeah.
Some of those can get pretty high.
Yeah.
That one's pretty.
All right, well, let's keep on moving. What aspects of site construction could impact your BMP? How can you resolve or prevent those impacts?
I wrote not much of anything. It's going to be on the roof.
Yep.
It's more of a ground BMP.
Yeah, we'll hit on that more. Okay, and then number 4, what possible maintenance problems do you foresee for your BMP as designed?
The frequency of inspection I had on there. And the first one I had really was ensuring proper construction of the membrane, you know, that early construction, inspection, making sure things are tight. I think that's going to, you know, prove to be the best thing for maintenance in the long run.
All right. So,
Yeah, what always bothered me, I still haven't heard the answer of this building, if green roof up there starts leaking here, how do you have any idea where it's leaking from? It can be anywhere on that whole roof.
Mm-hmm.
You know, my house leaks, I can kind of track it down. This building, that's a maintenance problem. If you do have a leak, how do you track it down?
Yep. I don't necessarily have an answer to that one, but that's good. That's something to consider for sure.
So I have frequency of inspection and maintenance and then upkeep of the plants.
All right. So I have a question.
Gardener,
Yeah. There you go. Yeah. So
having the right staff.
that's important too. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you all for your hard work. And let's send someone up from 3 and 4. And while you all are figuring out who you want to send up, I want to see a show of hands from all the rest of the groups. Some of the big takeaways I have from that were so plants, maintenance, and access, and built proper design and construction. Did you all hit on some of those for your facilities as well? Probably almost universal, right? I'm hoping. All right, let's see 3 and 4 what you all came up with. And I'll let you talk through your prompts since we already did that once.
For number one, what typical maintenance requirements for your BMP and how often these maintenance occur and equipment to use. We had the vegetative soil. So we said to trim grass weekly, clean the trash and debris weekly or monthly. And what equipment you might need is a lawnmower or trimmer. And you can use hand equipment, gardeners and stuff. And then to check the clean outs for under drain clogging. And you want to make sure to check after every major rainstorm.
I think you got the gist of it. And this first question, the main point of this is just to get y'all kind of get in the mindset of the maintenance worker and think about what we're actually doing with these facilities once they're in the ground.
Number two, how could these conditions and intended use of the area around your BMP impact its construction and maintenance? We noticed that there was a fence which might cause limited access to the facility, and there might be some restrictions to get to the back of the building and facility. And we said some trash and contaminants might flow into the facility from the adjacent road. And for number three, what aspects of site construction could impact your BMP? How could you resolve or prevent these impacts? We said there could be sediment and stormwater runoff into the facility. We said we can resolve it by adding a silt fence around it, clean and remove the sediment buildup. There might also be unnecessary soil compaction because there's a construction entrance that's right where our facility is going. And then what other possible maintenance problems do you foresee in BMP as designed? We said under drain clogging, riprap displacement, overgrown grass and vegetation, and trees and vegetation dying.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate it. So I heard a couple. There's these themes are going to continue, I'm hoping, through the rest of these. But we talked about access in your presentation. Again, plants for those facilities that have them are crucial. And then something that you brought up that I thought was also important to note was the construction staging. So you mentioned construction entrance as well as having proper erosion and sediment controls. Who else had stuff related to ENS as part of theirs? A little bit. All right, cool, awesome. Okay, let's talk to the next group now, 5 and 6. We're talking about bioretentions. I need a victim.
Want me to go? All right. I think you're getting the trend here.
Yep.
So pretty much, I won't even read the questions again, as we know. Number one, access to the bioretention areas. Right next to the building, they have root drains tying into it. So make sure it stays clean. Access, there's mulch in the bioretention area. Make sure the plantings don't die. Inspection, probably weekly. Put the mulch in the spring, once a year probably. Pretty much it. Number two, the conditions. Access again, mulch, plantings. Pretty much the same as everybody else. one thing we talked about, that you can write down, John, is, Ann brought up a good point. We're right by this area that congregates a lot of geese.
Oh,
And
that's
if the
a good
geese are
point.
chewing up the vegetation,
You're
we're
right.
gonna have extra maintenance problems there, because you have to replace plantings a lot more frequently.
Right.
Well, it's wildlife, things like that. A lot of times we don't anticipate
That
that.
wet pond right there, there's a lot of geese around that facility.
That's true. That is true.
What aspects of site construction could impact your BMP? And resolve or prevent those impacts, like everybody said. Construction of it, real important, make sure you have good ENS controls, that it doesn't clog up. Check the clean out, make sure it's not clogged and draining. Make sure the plants don't die. Other possible maintenance problems you foresee for the BMP as designed. Weeds in the fall, maybe, clog it up. Make sure it's baked out. Like you say, in wildlife. If it starts flooding, make sure it's not gonna make a problem with mosquitoes or anything like that. Place the mulch, place the plantings. Anything else?
Let's say last year, the ESI class went to, and we did a tour of this facility, and I
Right.
think Jonathan and I were both on that
We did,
tour,
yeah.
and they mentioned there was some problems during the construction of the water retention facilities. We couldn't remember what they were.
What the
Any rumors that like they had to rip them out and redo them or something?
Well, we might get to that. Yeah, so you know, it's always a learning opportunity every time we build one of these types of facilities. Every different type, we learn something new. So we're going to talk about you know, what we think the issues might be, and I guarantee you not every one of your issues that you mentioned or potential problems that you mentioned has occurred at this site, but I guarantee you that every single one of them has occurred at a site in Fairfax County. But we will talk about specifically what issues we encountered at this site. Some of them were related to communication. Some of them were just happenstance. Some of them were just maybe some design oversight or some things that could have been shifted around. But a lot of times you don't even think about some of this stuff until it's in the ground. And from a maintenance perspective, a lot of folks may not think of it they might not think of it very much, I guess we'll say, during the design phase. So fortunately, we get access to these plans, and this is kind of what we have to do is put our heads in the worst case scenario. What is the absolute worst thing that could happen at these facilities, and how can we prevent that from happening? And that's what I'm hoping to get to talk with you all about today and kind of work with you on is when you're doing plan review, when you're doing design, think about the worst case scenario for some of these facilities from a maintenance perspective, because that's something that we live every day. And for some of these facilities, it can be a legacy problem that could last years and cost thousands of dollars.
Yeah, I guess for this one, you'd have to undercut all the soil and mulch, and it'd be very expensive to get rid of that, and then have to replace all the media and the mulch and plants. Very expensive.
And I know we have good representation from both public and private agencies. So depending on what the warranty is on your facility, you know that money may fall on the contractor or the consultant, or later on down the road, it may fall on the public entity who manages those. So just something to think about. Thank you very much. All right, we'll do the last group here. And that is 7 and 8, pervious pavers, something a little bit different.
But it's green infrastructure.
It is, yeah. Also green infrastructure.
Now, this is not fair because Bryce worked for us.
Typical maintenance requirements, we said cleaning and vacuuming pavers, you know, the joints, the voids, and permeable asphalt. Checking the clean outs and under drain, make sure that there's not standing water, there's no clogs. Checking the condition of the pavers themselves, make sure they're not deteriorated or sunken or broken. And then infiltration, you want to make sure that water actually goes through, doesn't just run off. Number 2, said it's a busy parking lot, so that could make maintenance pretty difficult. And it does also, a lot of it's behind a secured gate, so just coordinating access could be difficult. Aspects of site construction, said proper subgrade preparation, and same thing with the others, proper sequence of construction. You don't want sediment-laden runoff entering the footprint, so you can combat that with sequence and ES controls. And other maintenance problems, said secure access, snow plows. Frank, I guess, mentioned that, or someone brought up in our group that, snow plows might dig in and pick up the pavers. And then it is a public safety building, even if there's signs that say, no sand in the wintertime, they're gonna prioritize safety over anything, and if they're using sand on the site, they're probably gonna be dumping sand on these pavers. So that could be a future problem. And then Frank, this is what Frank brought up, that at their WSSI building, they've used salt for de-icing on the pavers, and it caused some of the pavers to start deteriorating, so they had to replace them.
All right, well, thank you. So again, I hear a lot of familiar words here: sequence, access, design. These will come up over and over again. They're common throughout all of our BMPs. Now, obviously, pavers are a little bit different. Than bioretentions and green roofs. They all have some of their unique aspects, which we'll get into a little bit later. But let's take a look and see, what actually occurred at the site for each of these types of facilities. And again, we learned from each one of these, and we didn't hit all the potential possible hangups and problems that could happen for each of them. But I guarantee you that everything you mentioned, including the geese, including the salting, the access, all that stuff we've seen at one and multiple facilities, let's be honest, throughout the county. So for our green roofs, our biggest problem came from access. And as far as the function design of these green roofs, they were adequately and appropriately designed. But you'll see that access to one of them was limited. This was something that wasn't, and being a novice plan reviewer, I was not able to pick this out of the plan set. Maybe someone else spotted it. But for one of our green roofs, the access for maintenance is through a window. So these are 3 separate pictures. It's all the same. I tried to get a good angle. Actually, I didn't take these, but I think the intent was to get a good angle, but I tried to include them all so you can see what was going on. But here's the green roof, and this is an office window. And they even put a little sign, do not block the access door. But unfortunately, the access door is this window, and there's a desk right here that you have to climb over. So it's one of the most secure buildings in Fairfax County, if not the most secure building. And at some point, when we have to do maintenance, we have to send a group of contractors up there to access this secured building, climb over somebody's desk, and climb out a window to maintain a green roof, which may involve lugging soil through that window as well, tools out that window.
Bring their own ladder. It's about probably chest high on John. There's 0 stairs. So
Yeah.
you bring your own ladder, and then you have to shimmy a ladder through the window and then get it to the other side so you can actually step out and over. Yeah, it's a teeny tiny little key. It's plastic, and somebody holds it. We don't know who it is. But they have it. Yeah.
So I think the main issue here was, it wasn't caught initially at the design phase, and there were some communication issues between the folks that had an opportunity to review this facility and maybe the design engineer for Fairfax County as far as implementing them or approving them. So here you can see another picture of the green roof. Again, designed, functions correctly. Access is the biggest issue. We'll see this again, I'm sure. Okay, so vegetated swales. We haven't had too many problems with these facilities, although I'm sure you can see what the potential problem is here. Who can hit on it? Yeah, steep, right? So this comes down to, so for example, I would not be able to determine looking at a plan set if that was the appropriate slope because I haven't been trained in it extensively, haven't had a lot of experience. But I can tell you that sequencing for the planting and design of this is crucial. When is the best time to seed either grass or wetlands, typically? Fall, right? So if you were to design a steep slope like this, you would want to ensure that that grass would be seeded at the appropriate time and you can anticipate it coming up and stabilizing that slope. We didn't have a lot of problems, believe it or not, with that slope there, but where we did run into issues, this is some real erosion, and it's kind of hard to see with all the plants, and this was actually brought up, is the velocity coming off of our green roofs, so the water coming off the green roofs here. So again, maybe not something you can catch in the plan sets, and I believe this was built to design, but there were comments made and it was not really fixed until later, so again, a communications issue. But again, these were not terribly designed. They had good access. They were designed to spec. It's just we had some lessons learned from how they were installed on site relative to the rest of the facility. Bioretentions. This might have been what you were hitting on. Yep.
Question on the grass swales.
Sure.
We noticed that there was a comment that said paint the underdrains black. Is there a purpose to that?
Paint the under drains black. I
Green out caps.
do not know.
Picture.
It may have been
Probably an
sometime-
aesthetics.
Yeah, it might have been an
reason.
aesthetics thing. Sometimes we have issues with mowers hitting the caps and cutting them off, but black probably wouldn't help too much. Chartreuse or like bright orange would probably be the right color for that. I don't know the history on that. I would guess aesthetics too, because if you hit that with the mower, you're probably gonna know it. Yeah, so the bioretentions, so this is something that came up a lot in our conversation. I'm glad you all hit on it, is construction sequencing. So we can do our darndest to make sure a facility is appropriately designed and you've got appropriate access. But sometimes getting the message on the ground to the construction crews in the sequencing and the appropriate design and installation of these facilities relative to the rest of the facility can get all squirrely, to put it lightly. So unfortunately, we had a significant amount of disturbance at this facility as a result of the general work that had to be done there. And the bioretentions were the ENS was not suitable for preventing them from getting silted in, and as such, they had to be dug out and reinstalled essentially.
Because when you read in the green book, it says these siltwick is only good for 60% of containing the siltation.
Right.
Yeah, and it also, or the clearinghouse states that these should be put in once the contributing drainage area has been stabilized. So it needs to be the very last thing that goes in, and obviously that message didn't get through here. So contractor awareness and contractor education is a real need.
So access was good with these. The initial design was good, but it was the sequencing that we had the major issues with. Here's another shot, same general idea. Yep, go
I
ahead.
have a question on that and also on these certain swells. You've got soils media inside the bioretention, and what's the life expectancy of those? And then the maintenance of that, if you have to go back and replace the soil media, because I'm not sure what the life is, like 5, 10 years, 15 years?
For infiltration?
Well, no, the media itself, the growing media and stuff that makes up the material for your bioretention.
That is, I don't think there is a concrete answer to that as far as how long it's gonna last and how long it'll function appropriately. Obviously, if they get silted in and you lose that topsoil layer or the plants get smothered or drowned out, that's gonna require some maintenance. But as far as actual functionality of the sediment, that's something that a lot of different agencies throughout the country are looking to learn. And it is highly dependent on the specs of your facility as well as the climate. So this is something we talked about at the conference last week. There are folks in California and Washington State, all along the East Coast that are looking at this, and their specs for the biomedia in these facilities are different and all relative to where they are in the country. Because you have to consider that California, Southern California is gonna have different plant life and natural infiltration rates and soil specs than say Northern Virginia. So unfortunately, there's no solid answer to that question. We can say with 4 bays, roughly 5 to 10 years is when they need to be cleaned out. That's the recommended guidance. That is also not necessarily true from what we found in Fairfax County, probably because of the rate of development and the amount of impervious surface we have here. But that's a good point. And I wish I knew the answer.
What we do to try and figure that out is perform infiltration testing of these sites. And so once you start to see a real decline in its ability to function, that's when we would probably initiate some sort of rebuild.
So just to give you an idea what the lay of the land is here and why this happened, you can see the amount of disturbance that's occurring on the site. And it's inevitable, it's necessary due to the development of this facility. But as a result, we also had some impacts to our pervious pavers. So I think you all hit on this. But these pavers are also generally not, it's not a good idea to install them at the beginning or even in the middle of construction. And you definitely don't want construction equipment going across these. No stockpiles on these because the pore spaces will fill. And in some cases, I don't know how much you all have worked with these, once they fail, especially porous concrete and porous asphalt, once those facilities fail, it's not really a matter of going in and vacuuming out those facilities or using like a trailer-based system. Once that debris gets in those pore spaces, a lot of times they have to be replaced. At least that's what we found and other mid-Atlantic and northeastern jurisdictions have found. What's the other problem with this site? I think you all hit on it in the porous paver group as far as maintenance concerns would be. Remember we mentioned that this is at a police facility.
He said it. Access.
Access, yeah. Again, one of the most secure facilities in Fairfax County will need to be accessed by a large vac truck and a maintenance crew 2 to 4 times a year through a very secure gate, and it's the only exit for this lot for parking. So it involves maybe a little more coordination than we would like, and sometimes those messages don't get through between county agencies. And that's not just Fairfax County. I know all of your agencies and groups have some communication issues somewhere along the line. Well, imagine trying to communicate with a building manager who doesn't work for police, and that building manager corresponding with police to get permission for folks from a third party to come in here at a rough day, maybe sometime in the week, to come in and maintain it with a truck that, you know, like a huge vac truck. Yeah, it gets tough, exactly, right? And you'll also notice these are, you probably can't tell, but there's also a good amount of construction debris and sand built up in here as well. We're gonna get into the main takeaways from this, but I'm gonna give you all a break real quick. So let's take a 5-minute bathroom break, water break, what have you. And we're gonna talk about some of the commonalities that we all found throughout our facilities. I kind of just steered you to them a little bit, but I'm sure you can guess what they are. But let's come back at, let's see, say like 4:50. How's that sound? A little bit longer than 5 minutes.
You didn't get to that, but.
I know I'm going to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just move the break up.
I did, because we've been going for a while now.
Okay.
And we've got another one, but it's spaced pretty well where, you know, it'll take some time to get through that, and I want to make sure people aren't dying. Like my notes, very legible, yeah. How's it going? Still with FCPA? You work with John Lehman? Yeah.
Well, I mean, not directly.
Yeah.
I'm the park produce asset.
Oh, that's a big job.
Yeah.
Same job I saw you in when I was over there. The same one. Yeah, that's cool. Nice office.
Hopefully it doesn't change because there's people around. Same thing that you guys are doing with Timmons, right? The requirements gathering and stuff. We're doing something similar. And then you guys use right?
Yeah.
We're using Tririga to identify what to replace it with. It's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, I can imagine. So are you on the IT panel? It's like kind of brainstorming? What's it good?
Consultant effort right now to capture our business needs and business requirements. Like, what do we need? And I got to coordinate with golf courses, park services, resource management, cultural and natural resources, and park operations, and get everybody's information, and then eventually create an RFP, put it out on the street. So we're probably about 2 years before they have a system.
Okay.
It's interesting.
It's got a good tone. That's what I was.
The reason why I asked that, Val was in that class, so I was wondering how you found out that I gave the presentation.
It wasn't Val, it was somebody else. Was she not a fan of the presentation?
I just, I
wouldn't be surprised if-
sure what all those elevations down to the elevation floodplain is supposed to be on.
Oh, yeah? Oops. I'll forget to turn it back on, probably.
Still doesn't impact any of his houses. It's just a bigger area around his entrance. Other projects all reinforce all that after I talk to him, so. His drive. Which that's its own fun little issue. It's crazy. Because he already dug it in. So to come back and tell him, you need to fill that back in.
We're gonna get down the road and
It's the 21 sheet for a riser. To replace the one with the dam fill.
Yeah.
In this case, the engineer is the owner. You know better. Now that the
Except the one that's already there has
So John, here's what I got.
costing him his own money.
I had,
If he didn't know better, he
cycle
doesn't.
replacement was a bitch, operational and inspection regular.
to no structural design, which is geometry, such that the contractor can send it to American.
Accidentally getting disturbed by landscape, cutting off all the vegetation.
Big hurry.
I took took some other. I mean, I'll pay you later.
I don't remember any numbers on that. I would say that was. You can submit them. It's at your own risk. I don't
No,
know.
it's,
Maybe I
we'll
did. I
write
don't
a
know.
separate,
That's, as soon as I saw it, I said, that's.
but I think we can use those.
It's one of the most
We would
awkward
follow
questions.
Can I submit these things at the same
We're
time?
not doing it.
Well, technically, there's nothing that says you can't, but it's a chain reaction of fails. No. Are you sure you want to do that? I mean, you can't even.
For a lot of them, it's not their money, so sure they do.
Can't stop you.
But, when I'm looking at these, I try and put myself in like, what is the worst case? It's like totally, oh man, I gotta get up and stretch.
Yeah.
Here.
I don't remember, I think, the only reason I said that, I think she was the only one from MSN
Yeah,
there.
and that's what he basically said is move forward, get it moving and.
But yeah, it was a
You're always
general,
sticking your neck out when you do that.
approach or, introduction to asset management. Somewhat. It was identifying the fact that the risk is a component of the, how well it's performing and how it's doing it, what it's doing, your historical data, and the likelihood and the consequence. So it's a combination thereof.
Surprising to.
You guys, yeah.
So I didn't intend to take years out until
Right.
I was gonna take my principles exam because for surveying you have to take 3.
Yeah, because the pipes
I'll
have,
let you know, like I said, whenever I talk to you next, I'll read.
pipes have the NASCO,
I figured it would come email shortly. Do you remember the lunch schedule?
but ponds don't really have it, each one is unique.
I was for the 3rd exam.
And it probably can't for them.
I've asked him. For the.
Who is the contractor? AE Comps.
Right. There's a little anxiety there, but I figured it's $200, $160 or something like that. Worst case scenario, I'll learn from it.
Right now, we're trying to identify what standards to go with, like uniform and master list or whatever. And we might want to look at Omni class. They actually, Omni class, OMNI class. And they actually call out, they have standardized call outs for ponds and stormwater ponds and retention and all that, because you gotta have a structure that you could utilize their structure.
All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started again. So maybe traffic won't be too terrible by the time we send y'all home. We'll see. I don't know if it's really gonna matter though, coming from here. It's probably gonna be terrible either way. Sorry. All right, so I'm sure you're all gathered. I was kind of steering y'all a little bit about what our Fairfax County Maintenance's collective opinion is on some of the main takeaways from this presentation in this class today. But you all nailed it, and you even called on some things that we didn't list, including like wildlife, for example, which is something that you really can't anticipate. Although the pond there, it certainly would have been a good indicator that there was going to be a lot of Canada geese present. But I'm going to, a little bit out of order than you usually see for a normal presentation, I'm going to hit on the 3 main takeaways from our talk today. So we're like halfway through, and now I'm giving you the takeaways, but I want to see if you all could come up with them on your own with a little bit of coaching. So here you go. What are the 3 main points? These are the things to think about when you're doing plan review, when you're doing design, when you're talking to a design or construction engineer, just if you are a design and construction engineer, things to mull over. These are things that whenever I get a plan set or whenever I get a new facility in my inventory, I think about were these done, or how these 3 points are going to affect my ability to properly maintain a site. So the first one, always consider access. Keep in mind that we need to bring in vac trucks. We need to bring in excavators if it's a pond. Sometimes we have walk-behind vacuums. We have crews. Sometimes they might be dirty and have to crawl through a window on someone's desk and get mud all over the place. So we have a large and diverse amount of different folks and material and things and stuff that we bring to these facilities. So make sure that we can get there and do the work to keep them functioning. Second, know the contributing drainage area and site conditions. So you can't really do this without visiting the site. Before we design the stuff, before we put it in the ground, it's really important that we actually go and see what is going on at those facilities, not just on the grounds of the facility, but consider the watershed and considering all the drainage that's coming to that site if you can. Go there and take a look and talk to the people that work at that facility, if it's like a government center or a library or something like that. And if you can, get an idea of what the folks in the surrounding area are using the lands for. Because depending on what they're doing, it might negatively impact your stormwater facility and may impact maintenance as well. We're going to get into some specific examples of this. That's why I'm keeping it general for now. And 3, ensure the design makes sense. Easier said than done, I know. Build to the approved plan and sequence construction correctly. So you all are really good. You hit on this. Follow best practice when you're designing this stuff and when you're building it. Make sure you're building as designed. And if you're not sure if the design is correct or is going to function correctly, don't worry about getting third-party reviews. Even consider sending it to a maintenance crew, especially if you're in Fairfax County and you've got a plan set that you're trying to push through. Let the stormwater maintenance crew take a look at it, and we'll chop it up and dice it up and throw it back to you. Then you have to start all over. I'm just playing. So do your due diligence. Make sure that when you're designing the stuff and building it, that you're building it to spec. No surprises here. I know a lot of you all could teach this class, and you probably come up with these same conclusions. Just 3 simple takeaways. Try and keep them in mind at all times when you're doing this stuff, and we'll hit on this slide again just so we don't forget. So the rest of the presentation is going to focus on a few of those facilities we talked about, the specific maintenance requirements, things to keep in mind beyond just these 3 or in addition to these 3. And then we're going to go on like a little shop of horrors or airing our dirty laundry, if you will, about some facilities in Fairfax County that had persistent maintenance issues that might have been resolved by following one of these 3 rules. Again, if you're a Fairfax County manager or you're in the private industry and you were part of these projects, I'm not here to rag on you. I'm just using these examples to let you keep them in mind moving forward, because each one of these BMPs is an opportunity to learn. So common facility types. Let's hit the types first that we're going to focus on, and then we'll go through the specific dirty laundry, if you will.
Yes, so the first one that we'll talk about, and we'll get into a case study, is the cistern. So these are not widely applied in the county. We are starting to see them more. As John mentioned, we were just in Milwaukee for Green Infrastructure Leadership Exchange, and Milwaukee is covered in cisterns. It was quite remarkable considering the weather. But these are the various types that you might see in the county. Rain barrels, are the ones that come to mind, but they're typically not sized accordingly. But you've got gravity feed, you've got pump systems, and then the one in the middle is the one that we'll talk about a little bit later in our case studies, which is the George Marshall cistern, George Marshall High School cistern. But the basic function of these is that they collect typically your rooftop drainage. They can also collect some concentrated flow, but it's typically from the roofs, and you want to just reuse it on the property. And so the one we'll talk about today has an advanced filtration system. So I think it's called a VS5000, something really fancy. But it's a double filtration, so it goes through a large filter, and then it also goes through UV filtration before it can be applied to the ball fields at the high school. And that was a health department requirement that we add all those additional features onto that facility. But the typical ones that you'll see on the property, people are just going to wash their cars or water their gardens, things like that. And in order for these things to actually work, they actually have to be used. And so the biggest problem we see when we visit these sites is that they're full, always. And there's no irrigation plan, there's no plan to actually draw out the water and make room for new storms. And so, kind of defeats the purpose. And so.
A question regarding the filtering. Is this rainwater that's being filtered?
Yeah.
For use in watering a lawn?
Irrigating a ball field.
Why? If it's just falling from the sky, what are you cleaning? Because it'd just be falling on the field anyhow.
Like these
I
filter
think a
companies
lot of
need to
it
make-
was the thought of bacteria. That was trust me, we did not, this thing is still not operational, and I think it came online in 2012. But yeah, that's a good question. So we scratched our heads as well. So there's a pre-treatment upstream. There's a vortex hydrodynamic separator. We'll get into it, but
Yeah. I mean, I guess I can get it if it's
herbicides,
collecting runoff from a parking lot or something like that, I could see it make a difference, but
yeah.
hopefully folks aren't just randomly asking for these things.
Yeah.
Taking that into account.
Stormwater planning is not in the group, but they.
Okay.
You said that was a health department request.
According to the folks over in planning, that was a request made by the health department. Yes.
So that probably doesn't get applied to all facilities, just ones for a public facility like that on a
Potentially.
school ground.
I think it did have a lot to do with the location of the facility, it being with children, but I don't know the details on why.
Okay.
We just live with it.
So
That's a good question to ask yourself when you're designing, like why?
Yeah.
Sounds expensive. They're thinking
Yeah,
kids are gonna
oh.
be drinking the hose water.
I don't even know the half of the
Yeah.
expense.
It also has to do with how it's re-irrigated, recirculated. If it's through percolation underground, then it's not as much of a concern. But like Carly said, the bacteria, if it sprays, they're putting the bacteria, they're making it airborne. So that's one of the reasons they wouldn't want it to be filled with all sorts of biological stuff.
all right. So again, we're the maintenance workers. So sometimes we're not consulted on design, if you can imagine that. A lot of times, most of the time. And if anyone has sent me a design recently and I was consulted on it, you probably saw me scratch off the installation of these types of facilities. So sorry if that's the case. But we have a bunch of permeable surfaces. I'm not going to spend a lot of time explaining what these do because it seems like most of you all are familiar with the intent and purpose of a permeable surface, be it pavers, asphalt, or concrete, which is not pictured. Water drains through it, reduces runoff, and provides some filtration.
Can you go back though, John? So the picture on the right-hand side is kind of an access road. It's really off the beaten path. It's not in the main thoroughfare. It's not in the bus lane. It's not where kids get in and out of the vehicles. And it is a really good location for something like this. John will get into it, but location it means a lot. And so we have one particular site that is in the travel way where the children are going to get on and off of a bus. And so you think they're going to heavily salt those, heavily plow that, and then you have constant loading over and over and over. So keeping those things in mind is crucial. But this is a really good example of a good site location. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yep.
Fire lanes or something, like a fire lane. That's
Yeah, something that is, if it kind of didn't get plowed, it might be okay.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, so we talked about our three things: access, design, are two big ones for this, because you can install these as intended in places that have been spec'd before, or they've been installed before. But what we're finding is just overall, if they're not designed correctly, if the concrete or asphalt isn't cured correctly or at the right temperature, all it takes is just small variation in that to cause failure. And as part of dealing with these facilities from a maintenance perspective, we have often sought help from other agencies to kind of do studies on them to figure out, what's going wrong with these facilities, what's the main maintenance issues, because at any given time, we may be sending out maintenance workers to handle 100 of these facilities, and if the majority of them are failing, we want to know why. So that's how many we have in the county, but we did involve Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District in a study recently of permeable surfaces. We sent them to 60 of our facilities. We have 100 now. They sent them to 60, that's how many there were at the time, so you can see how quickly we're gaining these facilities. And they assessed them for basically functionality and proper design, construction, what have you. And the findings were not good. Their basic conclusion was that these are not a low maintenance BMP, that they are expensive and they are finicky. And they're often cited as a simple solution to install, but let me tell you, from a maintenance perspective, that is not true. At least not in this area. Maybe in coastal areas, areas that don't have snow, that might be the case, but that is not what we found in this area. It's not what was found in Philadelphia, and they're studying it now in New York. I suspect that might be the case as well. The main issues that Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District, it's a mouthful, found was that there was not an established infiltration rate. So these things were designed, but no initial testing of the baseline infiltration rate occurred. So some of them could have been failed immediately after design. So that's something that needs to be incorporated into this process. Think about, are these things actually functioning? And before you walk away from a facility, make sure what you've put in the ground actually works. Clogging.
These require under drains even if you have infiltration? Because if you have infiltration, you just cap the under drain. So are you saying that the actual installed media is not functioning?
Yes.
Or the soil?
The media, as far as we can tell. And it's not a guaranteed, from that point, the lack of design infiltration rate, it's not a guaranteed no, it's just that information was not documented as part of the design or construction process. So when we got them, we did an infiltration rate, we're like, that seems slow, but we don't know how it started. Those baselines weren't established.
So do you educate the legislators, the planning commissioners, the supervisors with some of your findings? Because what you will find is sometimes they really get caught up into one particular type of lid and really like to promote it. And those are one of them they like to really see.
I think there's a lot of room for that. Typically, most of my feedback comes through either talking to our construction engineers or just plan review and explaining in my comments why these aren't working. But yeah, I agree. There's probably a lot of opportunity for spreading the gospel of this, if you will. But at the same time, I think there is opportunity to appropriately install these. I might not have that information, but I can certainly tell you some of the areas where not to install them or some of the common failures of these types of facilities.
Yeah, and just from a feedback perspective, I'm sorry, our capital facilities group, which does a lot of capital improvements, libraries, fire stations, we've actually just asked them to not spec out asphalt or concrete anymore because it is very difficult to get the cure right, to get your mixes correct. We're just not accepting those into our maintenance regime anymore. So.
And especially with concrete and asphalt, we talked about building to spec as one of our main takeaways. When you have proper curing temperatures and conditions for, say, like permeable asphalt, your window of correct installation gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And what happens, for example, if you install permeable asphalt and it's too hot, the tack or equivalent will actually settle out, sink down into the matrix of the asphalt and wind up clogging the facility.
I'm just curious if you have a feel for like the average age of the facilities that failed. Is that part of the issue, the age and poor maintenance over time, or is it more an issue with the reservoir underneath?
Yeah, I could get that information for you, but based on my experience maintaining these, it's typically the facility conditions on site that there's usually some obvious signs that things are going to go wrong at these facilities, even beyond just getting the right specs. So we'll get into that in some of our horror show stuff at the end. But yeah, age certainly, I'm sure it plays a factor. I mean, over time you have salting, you have accumulation of debris, and a lot of times maintenance did not occur within the appropriate window or not at the right frequency, which is also something that is not established. There's a lot of groups out there that are advertising information about how to appropriately do this, but a lot of times they're in different parts of the country. They're at facilities that are not designed the same way as ours are, and might not have the same issues ours do. So as a result, and based on the findings of the study, we're doing more routine infiltration testing at least once a year, twice this year, and more frequent maintenance to try and determine, for these facilities that have clogged, if we can turn them around. So what the recommendations from the study were is we hit on this with the public safety headquarters. Sequencing is crucial, making sure that there's no run-on that's occurring that's going to clog those pore spaces. You want to time these things at the end of construction and avoid any sort of heavy construction equipment driving on these or any sort of debris stockpiling that could occur on site. Yes?
So is Arlington, I imagine Arlington's having the same issues. Have you guys communicated with them about how they deal with it?
I've communicated with Arlington about the issues that we're facing, and keeping an open line of communication about our findings.
I deal primarily with the residential infills.
Oh, right, yeah.
So we give no credit for porous surfaces.
Okay.
You can build it, you get no credit.
Mhm.
But I've heard that it's widely promoted in Arlington as a solution for residential infills.
Yeah, based on what I've seen with our public facilities, maintenance is expensive and frequently needed. So I'll leave it at that. I can't speak for Arlington or what they've
So
experienced.
just real quick, we do not allow for porous surfaces on residential properties to be input into a long-term BMP. So I think what we're finding is that, and especially under an INF plan type, but what we're finding is that subdivision plans are sneaking in that have maybe 4 homes on it, and they're putting any type of facility they want on those plans. So we just got one where it was a, what are those little driveways? Pipe stem, yes, it was a pipe stem type development, and each of the driveways off the pipe stem were porous asphalt. And we try with infills especially to go out and inspect those within 1 year of the bond release so that we don't have too much turnover with the property owner and they don't complain that we waited 5 years to go and visit them for the first time. So we try to get to them really quickly. And the first day, the very first inspection within 1 year bond release, they did their 5-gallon bucket test and it just rolled right off. So they all got their driveway sealed. Awesome. Yeah, they've already gotten their driveway sealed. So that is a tremendous, tremendous impact. And they have no idea what they've done. No clue. So we're working through that, but it's just not a good idea. I mean, you just got to think about the person on the other end and in perpetuity. That means forever. That's a gigantic expense. This whole community, parcel by parcel, is going to have to fix. So.
You've got your plan approved with that device, and now what do? Yeah. You have to go back and do something.
They're going to have to reinstall it, or they have to go back to land development and go through the whole plan process all over again. There's no, once bond's released, there's no revision. Yeah, it's not ideal.
But it's currently approved on a bonded subdivision. Utilization.
No, I think it reduces the C factor. They don't allow it for, well, no, do they?
They do, but I think it's.
Bryce, you may know better than me.
Credit.
Do you know?
Well, you might be thinking of, for compost amendments, they don't allow on residential law.
No. They don't allow porous surfaces either.
I've never used it on residential in the private areas. It's been on like parking areas, like a
Commercial.
townhouse.
Yeah.
Not real common, but it's, as far as I know, it's still allowed.
Yeah, I mean,
It may not be ideal, but you also.
I've had my arm twisted by the planning commissioners to put it in, so we'll put some token porous pavers in just to check that box to help get our plan approved. So that's why I was surprised hearing that perhaps you can't get credit for it, because I think we are on bonded subdivisions.
On bonded subdivisions.
Yeah, INFs you cannot.
Not on infills, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's constantly, they must have really good marketing, because it's just constant. Somebody comes in wanting to do it and they can't understand why the county won't give them credit for it.
Yeah.
Right.
And they send all the advertising brochures that they have to try to prove that it's effective.
Mhm. It's I think widely seen as like a easy fix, something that just makes sense, right? It just infiltrates into the ground, but
The salesmen are pretty good.
yeah, it's unfortunately, and I'm doing a lot right now to communicate with other folks in different parts of the country. But you make a good point about reaching up higher up in the bureaucracy and kind of let folks know that, hey, they seem like a great idea, but from what we've seen so far, we're struggling with maintenance. I think there is a lot of opportunity for that.
You educate some of the land use committee members about the situation. I've gone to land use committee hearings and they say, we want you to put porous pavers on this site. They don't give you reasons why, they just want to do it. And so from a political standpoint,
Right.
do it.
Because it's like a feel good sort of thing. It's like, oh yeah.
I made a note, Ed. Who we can talk to.
We always tell people you're welcome to put it in.
Mhm.
You just don't get credit for it. You still have to do something else.
Right. Yeah. I think it's important that we spread the word. So this is part of that effort. And even with all the maintenance that we're doing on them, a lot of them we still can't restore infiltration or appropriate infiltration. So I can't imagine what a homeowner would be doing who might see it as a passive facility that doesn't need a routine maintenance on it. So we're going to keep going, but these are all good points. So feel free as we keep going through to shout out and give us pointers too, because it's supposed to be a two-way conversation here. But some other findings that we found, or that was found in the study, and again, we touched on this before, sequencing is crucial in construction because you'll have run-on and stuff like this, which we hit on. And then if you're retrofitting a site, installing these, it's not always as easy as slapping down new concrete, new asphalt. If you use the pre-poured or the prefabricated stuff, getting the sub-base just right so it's level is very tricky. It's been tough, and a lot of times if you think you can just go in and re-pour asphalt or concrete, it may not be the right solution because again, that window of properly spec'd asphalt and concrete is very narrow when you consider that it has to be cured correctly, the weather has to be right, you gotta make sure that your construction group is not compacting the sub-base, all that stuff. For all these reasons, we're very hesitant about moving forward with this type of facility. With green roofs, we've had a lot of success with these. I think the main issue with green roofs comes down to access, as you saw, and not just access that makes sense for folks to physically get out, but safe access. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on what green roofs do. You all are familiar with these facilities, right? So again, touching on this is an extreme example, but making sure that there's a clear line of communication. And this might be something you need to talk to your contact in the county with if you're in a private agency, or if you're in the public agency, or if you're in Fairfax County, you're allowed to talk to who it is you're doing this work for and ensure that folks are going to be able to get to and out of this facility safely and easily. Other things to think about, we talked about our 3 points. One of them is build to spec, but also plant to spec. So you've got your landscape plan, follow it. We hire those folks to do those designs for us for a reason. There's not too many plants that can survive these type of conditions in Virginia, this drought and then flooding and then drought and flooding. We see that in all of our facilities. But make sure you're following the landscape plan. So have construction admin on site who can, or maybe have an ecologist or plant person on site who can confirm that what's going in the ground is correct. They don't need to be there the whole time, just maybe as the plants arrive on site, make sure the plants are looking good and that they're actually going in the facility.
Out of curiosity, who are you directing that comment to? Like the designers,
yeah.
No one's going to pay us to sit out there and watch that.
Yeah.
We pay our engineers to go and be construction admin for our projects. So it's becoming more and more popular, and we're seeing that happening. But we've also worked with LDS. John Matusik led the effort from the land development side to create the third-party certification checklist, and that was
That's a requirement. So
yeah.
That a lot of times is not
thankfully.
They hire some firm that'll just do it. Just like a
Oh, you're saying for the third party? Yeah, right. But we actually, for internal projects, I know stormwater planning, and then ourselves at maintenance and stormwater, we hire our engineer that did the design to also do construction oversight. So raise your hand if you've ever done construction oversight. A few of you, yeah. We find it to be very valuable.
Yep, and if you need to tap the abilities of your landscape architect in-house or subcontract, it doesn't take a lot of time for them to go out there and just confirm that what's being installed is the correct plant. Because if you have a mass die-off on one of these roofs, it's going to require a lot of additional work to get it reestablished again. Same rule applies for irrigation. This might go beyond the whole stormwater side of things, but think about how this facility is going to be maintained and watered, as the case may be, throughout the life of the facility, and if that piping is installed correctly, if it's part of your responsibility, or if the building manager or applies the plumbing code. There's a lot of stuff to think about there, and we've had instances where that plumbing has failed in the past. So I can't point to specific solutions to that, but just definitely keep it in mind when you're doing the design and review for these types of facilities, if it has an irrigation system built in. But really, the biggest one is access. Make sure that folks can get out in these areas safely, and also important that they can get back in the building safely. So this building has auto lock on some of these doors because it's a very secured facility. So we've had a lot of our maintenance workers or inspectors stuck out on the roof, having to make a phone call to get inside is tricky. Same applies with our permeable pavers. Make sure if it's in try not to install pavers in a secured area because we've had people locked in behind police stations and government centers because the person at the front desk fell asleep or wasn't paying attention or what have you, and they were stuck back there with a vac truck sitting at the gate waiting and billing their time, I imagine. So keep that in mind. Bioretentions, again, you know what these are. Water quality and quantity control. A few things to keep in mind with these. We've already covered some of the major ones, but we did a study with Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District. I'm going to mess that up every time. Of these bioretentions, we studied 130 of them, so they went out in the field and performed infiltration tests and inspections on these facilities, just like they did with our permeable pavers. We were coming up with problems with maintenance. The designs seemed funky for some of them. Some of them just seemed like impossibly installed and not according to plan. And the main finding was indeed that construction oversight, similar to with the green roofs, is necessary when you're putting these together. Not necessarily for plants, but just for appropriate design. Because what they found was largely the issues with these come down to the construction and how they were installed. 67% didn't have the proper depth. 32 didn't have the right surface area. 59 didn't have the right media soil depth. 55% didn't meet the suggested infiltration rates. So you spec these to be the appropriate size and have the appropriate volume to handle runoff from a given area. But if they're not designed correctly, when it comes time to handling that runoff, they're going to fail. Sometimes they'll fill up with water, there's continuous flow. Sometimes the plants will die because the conditions aren't exactly right, which gets into another thing. Plant maintenance for these facilities is crucial. Making sure you have someone who can, again, a landscape architect who can spec the correct plants for these types of facilities and making sure those plants are installed in them and not something else. Don't get too creative with these. Sometimes the simplest solution is the best. So again, construction sequence is crucial. Let's talk about one of our main 3 points. They also found that preparing as-built was necessary. There was a dearth in available as-built when they were reviewing these facilities. Making sure your surrounding drainage is stabilized, and making sure that, this is important, continuous flow is not being diverted to these facilities. And we had examples of this where continuous flow, and we'll show one of them, was diverted to a bioretention. I'm sure you can imagine the results were not great. They're there to handle incidental flow from rainfall, not a sump pump in a basement of a parking garage. And this one, with the pea gravel, that one is kind of being contested right now as if that's the best option, so I'm not going to hammer on that point. We talked to some folks throughout the country who had different opinions on that matter, so keep moving. Here is an example of one of our bioretentions that had continuous flow, and it wasn't designed with continuous flow initially. But as you can see, oops, I'm sorry. We'll get to that one later. You'll be able to see the thing was totally flooded out. Some other recommendations is make sure that you're verifying your particle size and your biomedia in situ. So make sure it's spec'd correctly based on the regs, and also when it's installed, make sure it's actually the right stuff that's in the ground. I know this is all kind of preaching to the choir here, but it is critical because from a maintenance perspective, if the things aren't put in the ground correctly, we're not going to be able to maintain them to spec. And then I hit on this earlier, but plantings, I think the main takeaway here is don't try and reinvent the wheel with these. There's basically 2 different types of bioretentions that we sort of spec out. There's like what we call the high maintenance bioretention planting plans, and then what you consider like a low maintenance bioretention planting plan. Those names are, not true. They're all kind of high maintenance, but you have your naturalized design, and then you have your basically what is considered like a road design, 5 individual sets of plants easily separated. That would be the high maintenance design because you have your plants separated out into individual rows so that when you have folks coming out here to weed them that aren't familiar with plants, they can identify, pretty easily if something is growing in there that shouldn't be. If you are designing a facility and you don't anticipate it having a lot of maintenance or a lot of attention, go with a naturalized design, where it looks kind of just like a big amalgamation of different species, but try and keep that number of species small, typically 5 or 6. And I can give you an idea of some of the species that work for those situations, but what you want to get away from is getting these too complex, because when it comes time for maintenance, we're going to send folks out there who don't know all these different species. They're not going to know a weed necessarily from something that was installed intentionally, and if they're all mixed together like that, they might have some issues sorting things out. So keep it simple for sure. In addition to that, you can keep your spacing tight for plantings when you're speccing these. That's more for landscape designers. But it's also crucial because these plants in both ponds and in bioretentions have higher success rates when they're planted in tighter densities. Usually 18 inches on center. You all may have seen different results, but that's what we found. Okay, wet ponds. Wet ponds are great. They can sometimes be considered amenities, which is good and bad because as a result, the expectations for the maintenance thereof can be higher than what would be for a normal stormwater facility. But there's a couple major takeaways when you're designing these. I'm not going to get into what a wet pond is. I know you know what they are. Make sure that if you are designing a wet pond, that you are considering maintenance in that design. So remember, these things need to be dredged just like dry ponds. And some of the older designs do not incorporate underwater forebays, which is crucial because it kind of isolates and contains that sediment up for a certain amount of time, which makes the eventual dredging a lot easier. But you need to couple that forebay with a low and mid-level drawdowns. So basically on your control structure, make sure you spec a way to draw that pond down to the height of the area that would need to be dredged, say the forebay, without having to drain the entire pond. So has anyone been present in any of the projects we've done in Fairfax County where we've drained some of our major ponds, removed the sediment from them in the last 5 years? So you've seen some of them. What's one of the big issues with doing that is all of the nice wildlife that has accumulated in that pond and grown in that pond, the fish, amphibians, reptiles. You drain that whole pond down, you have a nightmare on your hands because you can go in there and shock those fish up. You can catch those fish and try and move those turtles, but you're going to miss a majority of them just because of the nature of the beast, no pun intended. So make sure you have a way, if possible, to draw those ponds down to the forebay level and be able to scoop that sediment out without having to basically clear out the whole pond. As such, also please consider that these dredging operations have maintenance equipment that's part of it. So typically it's cheaper to do a mechanical dredge. So as such, you'll need an access road to each of those forebays and major structures that will need to be maintained as part of that effort. Pretty common sense stuff, but you'd be surprised by the number of ponds and designs we see that don't have access for heavy equipment to the major pond structures. A lot of the newer ones that are coming in do include those, but it's something that I frequently have to spec on plan sets. Like, hey, we're going to need to get into this forebay eventually. Maybe not in the next 5 years, maybe not in the next 10 years, but we're going to need to get a way to get there. And the same applies mostly for dry ponds as well. So dry ponds, typically we found need more frequent maintenance than the wet ponds in Fairfax County. So even small little guys like this, make sure you've got access for equipment, typically an excavator, even if it's a long arm excavator, those are fine too. But you have to have room to get in here without destroying the whole pond as part of the process. And this is especially true if you're dealing with enhanced ponds, ponds that have like meadows, high marsh, low marsh, or natural areas incorporated in their design. Coming from an ecological background, I would sure feel a lot better if we could come in through an access road than through a marsh or meadow with our excavator when we're coming to dig these things out. So we've seen geogrids installation access roads, we've seen just pavement access roads, compacted, I feel like 57 stone access roads. All those are fine depending on the size of the pond, but just please keep in mind that we're going to need to get in there at some point and clear the thing out. Other aspects that impact maintenance. Final slope should be significant to achieve proper flow. So remember, we talked about designing to spec. If you've had access, but designing to spec is crucial. This pond has a 1% grade, or at least that's what it was spec'd for. That's not really appropriate. In a perfect world, that might function correctly, maybe, but when you get topsoil installed and you get your plants installed and you get different pieces of equipment moving in and out of that facility as part of the design and construction process, you're going to wind up with low spots throughout the site. It's just not going to work. So make sure you have significant slope that is going to allow proper drainage. Also,
one thing, John?
oh yeah, sure.
So one thing that we have been dealing with a lot lately are the forebay berms themselves just not standing the test of time, and so they just blow out straight away. So if you could spec on the plans that the berms themselves need to be consistent with like a dam embankment construction, that would be really good because we're just having to go back. I mean, the forebays are non-functional once the berm's gone, and we're having to go back in and redo those. And so just getting it right the first time would be really good.
I don't know. So I don't know what an appropriate slope would be. I just know that when you get into like the 1% or even 2%, that sounds low to me too. But again, I'm not an engineer. I can just say that if you're getting if you're single digit 1% or less, be cautious. We haven't had a lot of luck with that. And homeowners do not like when these ponds have stagnant water sitting in them behind their house, as is the case with this pond, because here's this guy's
There's
house right here.
A wet 4-bay.
Yeah, and these ponds, a lot of the times they call for grass, sedges, rushes, things like that, and they're not going to help things any, as far as flow through is concerned. You see, I've bolded this point. Avoid inline dry ponds. Who knows what I mean when I say inline?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Doesn't sound dry to me.
Right, exactly. Perfect, thank you, yeah. Pictures say 1,000 words. I'm gonna show you some pictures of why that's a bad idea, but I think you hit the nail on the head. Please do not install dry ponds in line with perennial streams. And really ephemeral streams aren't a great idea. Look for installing dry ponds and enhanced extended detention ponds in areas that have flow either from the street or houses, rooftops, things like that. You'll see why in a second. And one thing I'd like to point out, when you're designing ponds, water does not like to make right angles. We've mostly gotten away from this in Fairfax County, but when you've got velocity heading down a hill and you've got a berm and that water's taking a right angle, it's gonna go straight eventually. Maybe not this year, maybe not next year, but it's gonna cut right through that berm. Okay, so I heard is there coffee in the back? All right, so quick break, say like 4 minutes if you need to take a bio break. We're gonna get into our examples here of some of the types of facilities we have installed and some of the problems we've seen beyond public safety headquarters. I promise you all don't have to get together on this one. I'll just talk. But let's get back here, let's say 5:34. How's that sound? There's also water in this other drain back here. You all probably already know that, but you've been in a million of these classes, I'm guessing already. This is like, so you're working with April at all on the infiltration testing for pavers?
Been involved with it very much.
That's good.
Yeah. I've done some inspections, but not this year.
We did them, I guess, for 3 years after the Virginia Soil Water Conservation District.
T&T doesn't have service. No service for AT&T in here.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm surprised.
Verizon.
They got you?
No issues.
Can you hear me?
Course pavement, and when we were out there, it was like 33 degrees.
Yeah, I know, right? Actually
So
pay
it
attention to
wasn't
clock.
frozen, but we didn't know. Yeah, so it was not ideal.
It's a little bubble fountain thing.
You'd think.
Sounds like you love the previous pavers.
Exactly. Some of them were great, some of them didn't function at all. That's right.
Heard enough of it, yeah. Right, right. They hear green and
They think they're smarter than everybody else. They want to do certain things.
You can do what you want.
My viewpoint is that let's all get our heads together. You got county representatives on board.
Your lesson learned or whatever photo from course payment from Shreveport Elementary.
Sure.
No.
It is.
Oh,
Yeah, it's funny, you talk to the salesman.
We have planned this like every time I drive in the parking lot. I'm like, this is such a bad idea. I just want to fix it. Oh, it's so bad.
Yeah, that was like.
Whatever problem.
Yeah.
They pieced together a survey, did some survey.
I think it's good. Like, we can talk about this up all the time. So what you see
I'm yawning too.
in the ground is,
Maybe some head scratching.
He's got some bottom.
Yeah, it's helpful.
Yeah, there was no tech and ice areas.
I mean, when they approached us, we were like,
There's nothing else that works, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Have a monopoly almost, I think. Yeah, the underground bridge, they said, that's been pretty popular. works out.
We had a job I worked on was at
I was
Capital
surprised to
One.
see the percentage,
And they
70%
had a,
trenches, 30% fire retention.
They had a cistern where rainwater harvesting. And they were picking up the roof water, but some of their roofs had patios on it.
Yeah,
Like,
seems
people go out
short-sighted.
and Take a break or something. And so they had a concern, I don't think they'll ever do it. They're concerned because people put salt down on the snows. It goes into the cistern.
Yeah, cookie cutter, change a couple numbers.
Giddy up, let's go.
Yeah.
That's what it's-
BRM, done.
Yeah. Although, you know, I guess they just supposed patio down there, I guess. Yeah.
We're dealing with that same result today.
How about you all?
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on. Eastburg.
Primarily
Yeah, we do a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, I never tried it.
Yeah.
With Danny and
What salt?
Ed.
Road salt, yeah.
I used to do that kind of stuff.
A lot of stuff going on.
Right.
Sure, you work
So,
in urban.
what-
shop.
The salt, the scramble is now, yeah, the liquid.
Oh,
Yeah.
Multiple design teams.
Oh, okay.
What they're using the water for is the cooling towers. AC. He said the thing is, they go through that, you can have a 10-year storm, you don't go through that, the water about 2
Saw your
days,
guys
3 days.
all over the
Put all
place.
this money into this big cold district.
Urban
Still
engineering.
doesn't even close to meet the water requirements we need.
Oh, yeah?
Some of our bigger sites are.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess, take the direction like the project.
Mm-hmm.
So,
That's a big one, yeah.
we're doing that project since.
Really? Oh my God. Still blowing up, yeah.
Still has several years to go.
It's really gonna blow up.
How you been, Michael? We just got one approved for that.
Yeah, my son's home for first semester, first year of college. Wow, is it condos?
It's a combination of multis.
Oh, so it's a big development.
It's got, like 11 million square feet of office.
Oh my God.
It's a big one.
You can't afford nice to get out. Sure, sure.
Get it.
Further down the line.
But it's gonna be.
You guys are in Ashburn, right?
Like take some time.
It's well absorbable.
You don't want to dump them all.
All right, we're gonna get back at it. Keep things rolling here.
Right, right.
So it is time to air our dirty laundry. I know it's a little on the nose. Sorry. We're going to talk about case studies. Before we dig into it too much, though, I just want to throw these up here again. So when we're looking at these case studies, this is a reminder for me as much as it is for you, our main takeaways when we're looking at each of these sites. And we've been spending a decent amount of time on public safety headquarters and going through each of our facility types. We're going to go through these fairly quickly, just so you can get a quick idea of what we see when we go into the field. Because I think looking at these types of facilities, I can stand up here and ramble all day, but pictures will tell 1,000 words. And actually seeing what's going on at these facilities, as if you were a maintenance worker approaching it, or as somebody trying to inspect it, it'll give you a better idea from a day-to-day perspective of what to look out for. So Carly's going to go first. We're going to talk about that cistern that we mentioned.
Project, and so Fairfax County gave Fairfax County Public Schools money to enhance their stormwater on the site. And so the construction oversight and the construction inspections, that was all Fairfax County Public Schools. Lesson learned there is that we're not going to do that anymore. We are going to be involved in the oversight of our funds. But if you look here, so this is the high school, and down here is where the cistern is. It's located here. And there's a pump house directly adjacent to it. So it's just kind of, this is, you know, it's out of sight, out of mind. You wouldn't know it's there if you were walking around. It has Velcro access doors, some manholes, and some various other features that I'll get into. But real quick, some project details. The Marshall High School itself is 45.5 acres, and we installed a 340,000-gallon underground cistern for stormwater harvesting. It irrigates 3 ball fields on the site. We installed a pump system for irrigation. We installed a UV disinfection system to treat the stormwater before to ensure student safety. What does that mean?
So I've been thinking about this one, and I think I know why they went ahead and did that. Because if I remember correctly, this runoff is coming from a artificial turf field. And yeah, if you have like kids or you've played on one of those, you know that if you like get cut on one of those, or if you ever maintain one of those, Park Authority folks talk about these all the time. Like there's, you know, if you get cut on, say, like a regular grass field, you know, whatever blood comes out, it's going to infiltrate in the ground. But if you're on like an AstroTurf field, it's just going to sit there, and people are going to come in contact with it. So I guess when the rainwater hits it, they had to consider some of the, you know, human biological stuff as well. I think, yeah, I'm not super familiar with this one. Runs off the sides. Yeah. So it's hitting this field and running off. So any, like, you know.
How do you use the filter? Was that what you said?
Yeah, yeah. So.
Yeah, so.
Like the ones you have in aquariums.
Yeah, so we installed a pre-treatment device, which is the hydrodynamic separator, and access road. In total benefits, we removed 11.3 pounds of phosphorus per year, 81 pounds of nitrogen, and 1,743 pounds of sediment. And we detain about 713,000 cubic feet of stormwater. They estimated the net savings was about $52,000 a year in water use savings for the site. So as I said, this was done kind of away from us. We really didn't know what was happening, and we didn't review any plans, and we didn't no one oversaw it from the county non-public school perspective, the installation. So we'll get into some of the issues there. So just to kind of give you an understanding, so I think it's called Storm Trap. It's a double stacked storm trap cistern. And it is gravity flow into what we call our dump valve. It's kind of the box that we've labeled it. And the dump valve, we had a pressure transducer in there to monitor levels, and it just kept flooding and flooding and flooding. And so we couldn't quite figure out what was going on, and we finally got our hands on some construction photos. And sure enough, the whole entire facility was backfilled with 57 stone. So we're just sucking the water right to it. But the construction specs didn't say to do that. It should have been backfilled with regular soil. So that's been a real problem for us. And then that's not going to get fixed. So what we have to do now is go in and waterproof the interior portion of the structure. But you can see that the pipe goes in, that there's a dump valve here. So we'll open that up in the wintertime to let the water just pass through. And then it moves into the actual irrigation portion. So when we were told, here you go, this is yours, we were like, oh, wow, okay. So there was no cellular connectivity. There was nothing that would allow the irrigation system to work. So there were a lot of oversights. There was no, the plans themselves said to build a Velcro door directly over the orifice within the storm trap. That was missing. So in order to access that critical part of the facility, we have to go all the way down to the end and confined space entry in, and we just barely can get in with the 150 feet restriction on the entry. So that's been a problem. We're going to have to retrofit and add that structure. There was no trash rack protecting the orifice, and so you can imagine all the tennis balls that we had, and the tennis balls within this system here. So that trash rack was just never put in. And you see, this is where we were supposed to have access, and this is where we were supposed to be able to monitor levels. None of that happened. So this didn't happen. Tennis balls all throughout here. Water bottles. Water bottles are they were very common throughout this system when we took it over. So we've retrofitted that. We've gotten the trash rack installed, but we still can't access it from directly above. So that's a real problem for us. Like I said, the dump valve floods continuously, so we're trying to figure out, should we do grout injection to fix the exterior portion, or we need to have somebody come in and waterproof the inside. We haven't found a vendor that'll do this yet, so it's in the current state, it just still gets water intrusion. And then it moves into the actual pumping system itself. I think it's about, it's 15 feet. I was going to say 15, this is 14. It's about 14 feet deep, and this is the crux of our issue, to be honest with you. So the pictures will say a lot more, but essentially what happens is the pump just draws the water from the well. It comes up, it gets treated through. This is like this big micron filter here, and then there's another UV filtration system, and then there's all the brains of the system. And there's 2 different softwares that we have to pay for. We have to get cellular out there, so it's very complex. And none of that was done prior to giving it to us. So we went through, and in 2014 we came up with an MOU, or 2018 actually, we just got to sign an MOU with what the schools was going to do, because actually all the athletic directors in Fairfax County operate irrigation systems. So that's a weird fact, but we have to deal with different athletic directors at different schools when it comes to stormwater on the site. So that is that's kind of the gist of this, but you'll see there was no consideration ever of maintenance. And so this is the floor of the pump house, and this is where we pulled the pumps out. But we had to take the canopy off the building and crane in and pull the pumps out. And you'll see where we had to actually make an additional cutout in the floor around all the rebar or whatever the barriers were. But we ended up not being able to get very wide because of the framing. And so this is just like you take the pipe off and you look at it and you're like, oh, okay, this looks okay. Oh, yeah, no. So we have, this is metal. It's falling off and flaking off. And so when we were looking at the filter and we were looking at the UV system, the UV bulbs are orange. They're just completely orange. They don't even work. And then the filter itself, there was just, the technician that went out, he was like, it looks like sediment. So I was like, baggy it up and bring it back. And so we baggied up this stuff. And we couldn't, we were trying to do like a test to figure out like, what is this? Nothing was happening. So I got a magnet and I was like, oh, it's metal. It was sucking all those shards up. So the whole system was built using subpar materials. And so this is what we have. The pumps do not work. This is our pumps. There's 4 propellers in there so that it can go from 14 feet up. And they just do not work. They don't work. So we've pulled those out now. We've done a bypass so that city water is actually what is being irrigated now. But this is like the biggest nightmare you could ever imagine, and it's still not fixed. So we now are at a place where we have to go and replace all the pieces within that system to stainless, and stainless is extremely expensive. And yeah, there was nothing salvageable throughout the whole system. So now before we actually get it truly operational, we're rebuilding the whole thing. So just making sure that you actually give some detail on what the materials should be, thinking about the salt that might be coming through the system and anything else. It's crucial. I think we'll end up probably spending a good $80,000 just on the replacement material to get this thing up to a condition that is functional.
So the tank itself, you're gonna have to replace?
Tank's fine. Tank's fine. This is the pump portion. Yeah, so the tank's good, luckily. But we do have to, we're working with Storm Contact, I guess it is, and they're helping. Bryce, are you doing this? You're helping us do this. You're helping us do the access. Yeah, so we're working with them to try to get us back to add access after the fact.
And you're not gonna do anything about the infiltration?
Infiltration?
Yeah, you see you have a leakage problem where the water's.
Oh, yeah. So we thought we found a vendor who could come in and waterproof the interior portion, but they kind of ended up not working out for us. So, yeah, we're still looking for a vendor. But we were thinking maybe that spin material, like what they do with the pipes in undergrounds with the corrugated metal, you know, they just come in and they spin. It's almost like that stuff you put in the back of the trucks, the rhino liner kind of stuff.
They shoot miners in water lines all the time, they can do that.
Yeah, so we were thinking that we would just try to figure out somebody that does it for that area, apply it to what we need. So that's Marshall. I mean, we could really go on a long time about Marshall, but Marshall, it's just not, in theory, it's a great idea, but it has operationally been a real nightmare for us. We've spent a lot of man-hours just researching and trying to piecemeal and try to figure out what happened. And so construction oversight, we've decided if we're going to be dedicating public money to for a partnership project, then we must oversee the construction aspect so that we don't end up with things like this.
Yep, takeaway 3. So
yeah,
design and make sure it's built to spec. Have construction admin.
Well, and have specs. I think that was the problem, is there were no specs about the material for the irrigation parts, and so they went the path of least resistance, and it was cheaper, and they bought subpar material. So lesson learned. So this is another example of just, you know, this is called the Occoquan Overlook community, and if you notice right dead smack in the middle, there's a power line, big, huge easement. And what better place to put a bunch of bioretentions, except that Dominion Power has very strict guidelines for putting plantings within their easements, and they'll just come and blow them out. And they have, you know, height specifications and restrictions and things like that. And so this community was constantly getting their bioretention gardens whacked down. And they went to the board, and we heard a lot about it from the board, and they wanted us to kind of make those go away, and we couldn't really do that legally. And so we decided to work with Dominion to come up with a low vegetative height planting plan. And so, yeah, Dominion has certain requirements. So it's probably not a good idea to put a vegetative practice in an easement that's routinely maintained.
But there is a process for Dominion to go and do an encroachment request. They didn't do that?
Apparently not.
Yep. So point 2, know the surrounding area, the drainage of that area, and the activities and use of that area. In this case,
yeah. So this is
the
what it looks like when
too.
you're out there walking the site.
So this is from another facility, and it doesn't. This is more gets to like the construction admin side of things, and a little bit towards, you know, keep hitting on the landscaped architect sort of thing. But when you are speccing soils, topsoil, fill dirt, what have you, make sure that what is being installed is the correct stuff. That's basically it. Have someone on site who. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Who can confirm that what is being installed does not have large pieces of, like in this piece of concrete or aggregates mixed in. Make sure if it's called to be sieved, that is the case, because you can have large chunks like this that can impact mowers, it can impact other aspects of maintenance, but there's other more unforeseen impacts in not having properly sieved soil. So this is the same site. Does anyone know what plant this is? It's knotweed, Japanese knotweed. And this is what it looks like in stream valleys, next to ponds, or in vegetated swales if it gets out of control. Has anyone been to Pennsylvania or New York recently? Any trout anglers in the room? If you've fly fished along any of those streams, you know that in many cases both sides are now covered with this stuff. So if you're installing a stormwater facility, and this is an extreme example, make sure your soil is appropriately sieved, do your proper construction admin, make sure the materials are correct, because if you get just a few root masses like that, the site had maybe 20 or 30 at least in there. It only takes one really to get a growth like this. So an extreme example, but something to consider nonetheless. So yes. Not, Japanese knotweed. It is typically found like in aquatic areas, semi-aquatic areas, and spreads really rapidly. And it's also non-native, so not something that's frequently, well, it would never be specced in a bioretention or a pond. And if you have folks in the area who are tied into the native plant communities and that sort of thing, they're going to raise some issues with having this in their natural area, if you will. Okay, so we've got a couple more that we're going to go through relatively quickly here. Sorry for the cartoony nature of the site, but I wanted to give you an overview and some dimension to what's going on with this facility. So similar to our public safety headquarters, this facility was designed to be a showcase of green infrastructure. So we have a green roof here, a little tiny green roof there, nothing really of note to say about that one, but we've got a bioretention right here in the middle, and we've got permeable pavers right next to it. That's right, yeah. So yeah, fire station, supervisor's office, relatively small facility. But this gets into, again, knowing the surrounding area, knowing the drainage, and knowing how that facility is used, point number 2. Because these are fire bay doors, and firefighters under our MS4 permit are permitted to have some discharge that can go to storm as long as it's related to firefighting activities, and in some cases, I think even rinsing of their vehicles is allowed as long as it's getting some treatment. But the volume of treatment that's going into these bioretentions and these pavers was causing serious issues. So here you can see the slope. These are our bay doors here, and then our permeable pavers, which discharge right into our bioretention. Does anyone see the problem with this situation here?
We give a max 4% slope on those. It's pretty steep. Like that.
Yeah.
It's
It's pretty steep slope. You would know better than I would, but yeah, the slope is steep in field. It's about as steep as that looks. And you'll also notice, I don't know if I've got a, yeah. That's not a curb.
They'll stop.
That's what I'm getting at. Yeah, there's no curb cut here. These are parking stops and curb stops. And okay.
It's just a wheel stop.
Yeah. There's no real barrier between the bioretention and the permeable pavers. So again, knowing how this facility is used, knowing the amount of discharge that's coming to the site, you may be able to determine that if you fill this bioretention with mulch, and that thing can't handle the amount of flow that's coming into it, that mulch is going to overflow into your pavers, and that's exactly what happened.
No.
Okay. Yeah. That's correct. Yeah. So once the pavers inevitably fail, then they'll just become regular parking spaces. So we attempted to remediate the situation by installing curbs here with curb cuts, a couple holes that the water could flow through. We also tore out the old pavers and reinstalled permeable concrete. This was like an in-house retrofit. But in the end, not only was the amount of water coming to this facility extreme, but something that an oversight on our part is that the surrounding area is not completely stabilized. You can see this hillside here. That's on the other side, but the other side of this facility, it's less steep, but relatively similar forested area. There's just a ton of debris that comes in here and fills those curb cuts and just clogs those pavers immediately. So, yeah, it's example looking good.
Was that a preformed slab?
Yes, this is a preformed concrete.
Stormcrete?
Yes, yeah. Yep. So they can work. They do work.
It's made in a lab. Yeah, it's made in a controlled environment, and they ship it in. No.
Nope.
And he actually, the owner of the company came and he monitored it. We had some raveling along the edges. He took it upon himself to, research why that was happening and replace stuff. They were really good to work with. This was our first application in the county of that type of preformed porous surface.
Right. So point 2, know the facility area, know the drainage of it. There was some oversight on the amount of debris coming to it. You can't necessarily foresee that, but at minimum, talk to the folks that are in that drainage area, especially if it's firefighters who are washing off equipment, whether or not they should be, into that bioretention. Get familiar with the activities of that facility and how it might impact what facilities you're going to be installing there. Point 3, build to spec. So this is a bioretention at Lake Fairfax Park. Can anyone see the problem here? Well, I mean, it's full of water. That's definitely a problem. Does anyone see why? Oh yeah, no vegetation. So that's important, probably because it's full of water. We didn't put aquatic plants in here. And it doesn't drain, where someone said that over here. So why doesn't it drain? Oh yeah, I mean, that's a fake tree. We just put that there. No, I'm just messing. Yeah, take a look at your overflow or your drain here. Do you think that is the correct elevation? I suspect not. This is what we see in field, that same facility when it's not full of water. So build a spec.
Higher than the surrounding berm.
Yep. Have construction admin on site to make sure that your elevations are correct, get appropriate as-built. All very, it's all great ideas, helps us out in the end.
But we just redid this.
Yeah, we did. So this
right before Memorial Day weekend. But we don't have a picture to show you.
It has plants in it now.
Yeah, it should be working now. Definitely did.
Just good old Sawzall. I don't know what they did out there. Here's another bioretention. This is the one we talked about earlier that had that continual base flow and why that's a problem. I mean, again, point 2, know the surrounding area and know what drainage is going to it. Continuous flow to bioretentions does not work. That's not how they're designed, but that's what happened here. So we were unaware. This is at the courthouse in Fairfax County, or Fairfax City, City of Fairfax, that one of the discharges going to this facility was the sump pump from the parking garage, which had almost continuous intrusion from groundwater. So as a result, we have continuous flow to this bioretention. And there's a reverse order here, but this is eventually what happened after continuous inundation. Even the aquatic stuff can't survive. So we did retrofit this one. Obviously, we had to divert that flow. I'm not sure how that worked with the sump pump where it eventually went, but we basically had to cut it off from going into this facility because it would just continually flood it. And I wanted to include this picture because this is an example of the simplified planting palette that we've spec'd for our high maintenance bioretentions, those that get frequently weeded by trained folks. We've got each of our plant species spec'd out in rows like that, so when folks are going through and weeding it, they can easily identify what doesn't belong there. There are pros and cons to this. One of the big cons is if one of these species doesn't survive, you have a big dead area. So keep that in mind. That's why this is like a higher end maintenance sort of thing. If you have a big empty block of stuff there, then weeds can move into that, so you typically will have to replant it. It's something we're trying out. We're experimenting with it at a few sites. Fire Station 36 is another one of these, it's bioretention. And I'm not gonna spend too much time on this one, but basically what this gets to is point 1, design spec. The berm wall was lower than the overflow, so it was overtopping the berm before it was accessing the overflow into the storm drain. Okay, let's talk about ponds. So ponds are very close to my heart because I, in part, manage them along with one of my colleagues, and they have a whole bunch of problems associated with them that we talked about. We're gonna go over some of the extreme examples and why you should never build a dry pond in a inline situation. So this is Leland Pond, and this is a dry pond. See the problem, it's got a forebay, it's back there somewhere. And the problem here is whenever you have, this goes to point 2 about knowing your surrounding area, in this case your drainage or your watershed, but really it more goes to my point of don't build dry ponds in inline situations. You've got the whole watershed going to this and all the organic material and debris and trash and whatever, it's being washed off of the watershed into the stream and directly to this trash rack. So you're gonna be constantly dealing with clogging issues. There's no way around it, and there's no good solution where you can have this sort of situation in place. Dry ponds just don't work. You could have a crazy trash rack maybe, but I'll show you an example of that later and why that didn't work.
Is that a regional pond?
Yes.
Yep. So here it is in this dry situation. You can see all the plantings that were installed when it was dry did really well underwater for months at a time. And you're probably wondering why they're installing a fence around this fence, and that is, any guesses? Okay.
Not you, you
There
can't
you go.
say it.
Yeah. Oh, you know, it's a beaver deceiver because we have perennial flow through this system, constant water constantly going through it. our large rodent friends find it in their best interest to dam it up at every instance they can. So we have to somehow outsmart them, which is way easier said than done, or trap them, which is, I guess, from the perspective of being in the public eye, not great, we'll say, to say the least.
Endangered species, yeah.
We take them out to the beaver farm. You know, it's a couple states over. Yeah. Here's other examples of our beaver deceivers, and you can see, you know, these are also, I presume, inline dry ponds. They're not great. They don't last forever, and they're subject to all the same debris and junk that goes downstream that will clog the trash rack. So just don't do it. Just don't build them on inline.
Make it wet.
Here's another one.
Just cut to the chase.
Yep. Okay, another inline dry pond. This is another dry pond, and this is a pond that has an over 200-acre watershed, and it's a dry pond. So some of the same problems we see at Leland Pond, the last one we're seeing here. But we also have a whole new host of problems, which I'm going to show you. So remember how I talked about all the organic material, all the debris, all that junk goes down to the trash rack here that the stream carries it to. Well, with that debris and junk comes seeds of invasive plants. And any bits and pieces of invasive plants, it might be in any of the ponds or whatever that's draining into that stream uphill. So this is our trash rack as installed at this facility. And you can see the water level's pretty low here. But you'll notice all this green around, that is all Ludwigia paploides, which is called water primrose. And it's an invasive plant. It's really, really hard to get rid of. It's perennial, and it multiplies by like fragmenting, so pieces of it can fall off and it'll keep growing, and it's impossible to get rid of. You really can't get rid of this stuff. It's pervasive throughout all of Fairfax County's watersheds. This is our trash rack on the downhill side of this pond. This is our riser structure. And you all remember all that rain we had last year, right? Well, this trash rack gets clogged frequently because there's a low flow orifice right here. Can't see it, but it's about that big. And your 200-acre watershed go into a low flow orifice that big, and you can see the writing on the walls. It gets clogged almost immediately. So when we have this thing fills with water from all that rain, the wind and current push all of that Ludwigia paploides on top of our trash rack. So this is the same angle. So there it is.
That is insane.
And then after all the rain. It was a nightmare. So imagine like, you know, sitting at your computer and you help to maintain these ponds, and one of your landscape architects says, "Hey, I was taking a look at my plantings, and this is what we found at the riser structure." Yeah, I'll be having like nightmares about this one like well into my future. Be like those nightmares you have about going to class and stuff.
Can we splice this Lubigi guy with the grass in my yard so I don't have to
Yeah. Sure. Okay, so before, during, and then after. So this is after we cleared we had a contractor clear all the water primrose off the top of the trash rack. And you can see it is totally collapsed here, and it's collapsed on this side.
Do you notice what else is missing? Go back to. Our dewatering valve was damaged.
That guy right there.
Yeah, it's gone. It completely broke apart.
Yeah, so.
It's actually there on the stem, but it's sitting down now. It was unbelievable.
June of last year. Less than a couple weeks, maybe 1 week. Oh, the
the water level rose and it just matted on top. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a unique situation, something that you're not necessarily going to be able to plan for, despite our 3 main points. So again, just don't
But
build
it's in line,
dry
so.
ponds in line. And this is what we had to do basically in winter. We have to go out and dredge this stuff out. And this gets to point 1, access. Do you think there was an access opportunity for a trailer with this little boat on it? No, we had to basically go over the dam and denude a part of the dam in the middle of December. This is expensive. There was over 30 yards of this invasive plant in the pond. And right before they came out here to do this work, the plant overtook the trash rack again. So in the same season, right before they got out there, which was fine because they were able to, do their job and take it off for us. But there's not too many universal takeaways from this. But I guess access for heavy equipment when stuff goes wrong, which it will, is crucial. So maintenance roads to the riser structure and forebays is real important.
And wouldn't that happen in a wet pond too?
Yeah, so again, make sure you have access to your, whatever your structure is. Hopefully it won't have a small low flow orifice. Hopefully it'll be a little bit bigger than that, but there's not much you can do about the invasive plants. That's, no amount of construction oversight is gonna prevent that from happening, except for, in the case where it's being incorporated into the soil or something like we saw before. It's the nature of the beast living around here.
There's not much you can do with those low flow orifices. See, we've tried numerous types of enclosures to keep trash off of them. You can't.
Yeah, we did the same thing with this facility. We tried retrofitting it to keep the trash out, didn't do a darn thing. So.
But you all in Loudon seem to do it the right way when you just use the weir wall, so there's no clogging. Those are great. We don't have a single one in our county, but we're about to, I think, Matt, you're gonna do that project, yeah. So we're gonna put in a weir wall and see how it works, but they seem to be low maintenance. Too late now for us to retrofit Fairfax County, but Loudon's got it going on the right way, I think.
Yeah, it is not cheap as you might expect. This is what the landscape plan of this pond looked like. So in an ideal world, there's actually a forebay in the back there,
And it is showing up wet, and that is because actually Chuck's group had to modify the orifice size because I guess they did not, the original calculations for base flow. Yeah, so we had to increase the orifice size, and we did leave a standing pool of water because that just functioned better, right?
So as a result of just the conditions of this pond, we have to have somebody out there twice a month, just at minimum, just to unclog this thing and handle any of the debris that's accumulating on the trash rack. So, along with, yeah, well, we mechanically removed it, and there is some treatment going on too. So they're trying to get out ahead of it, but the best time to do this removal is in the middle of the winter. So we're going to see how it accumulates this year after our initial removal, and we have some funds set aside.
Originally 2 years ago, we made the bond, so we did it again.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the company that's doing is Solitude, and they're really good in what they do. But they also applied something called Foslock.
Right.
So
yeah.
it's a binder that will kind of suck up all the nutrients in the water column and discourage the invasives from flourishing because there's no suspended nutrients. So they're coming out and they're doing spot treatments. They did the Foslock application, and I think we've got them on contract to do one more harvesting and one more Foslock if needed.
Right, but that's all expensive, as you might imagine. So.
But we're getting ready to do it countywide on all our wet ponds. So aesthetics are coming into play.
Yep. Yep, so I'm sure you can see the problem here, maybe some folks in the back. This gets to point two, know your surrounding area, the drainage, and what's going on there. So these are permeable pavers here and here. Does anyone see the problems with this site? See all this dust right here, all this stuff. This is a soccer field, and for those folks who have kids, like you go to their games and you get a lot of people running back and forth, in this area trying to cheer their kids on. It's not great for grass growth. So what we have is basically denuded areas here with sand that just comes across and fills our pavers immediately. There's also a baseball field on the other side, and you can, different times of year, you can just see the line of sand going right across the lot into these pavers. Not something necessarily you'd be able to get a handle on, but it's really important to do your due diligence and take that extra step going to the facility, going to the site, talking to the people at the library. But they might have mentioned there was dust issues at the site. Talk to the school over here in the surrounding area and just get a feel for what's going on in that facility. This is the same site. This is more of a design flaw. Maybe it's not a design flaw, maybe it was intentional, but it's having a negative impact on maintenance. So there should be, in my mind, a curb cut here. And I think the intention was that these facilities would infiltrate flawlessly. But what happens when they don't infiltrate flawlessly is that this lack of curb cut causes water and sediment to deposit here in this area. So, as you can imagine, these facilities are not functioning correctly. This is an example of permeable pavers that we're not getting the required infiltration rates on. Also, libraries are not a great, well, there are worse places to install these, but keep in mind the use of that facility, again, point two. Any de-icing activity that occurs is typically bad for these concrete or paver type facilities. And if you have a facility that's going to be open shortly after a storm that's going to involve children going in and out, or just the public in general going in and out, folks are going to want to have it de-iced. So that is not great when you have your handicap spots that are permeable pavers, which are not supposed to be iced or de-iced in the wintertime. And just a couple more examples. When we're talking about point 1 or point 3, making sure that stuff is spec'd correctly and installed correctly, that applies to proper curing of permeable surfaces. We've hit on this a bunch, so I'm not going to really go over this again, but just make sure that you're meeting the manufacturer's specifications in field when the stuff's being installed. This is some raveling that occurred at one of our porous concrete sites. Another example, Lemon Road Elementary, same thing. And Shrevewood, you mentioned this one. Shrevewood Elementary is a school that has permeable asphalt here and also in the back lot. Does anyone see an issue with the location of this permeable asphalt here?
Bus drop-off?
Bus drop-off, yeah, that's it. So at this site, we have 2 inches of depression in our permeable asphalt because the buses park there for sometimes hours at a time, and just that loading, enough with some compaction that occurred during installation and possibly some issues with the curing of that asphalt, has just made it a total mess. And it's yes, it's a trip hazard now. So you probably saw that they put some cold patch on it to kind of even it out up onto the curb, but it's going to have to be replaced. It doesn't infiltrate either, but I'm sure you all guessed that. Okay, so to close things out, try to get you out of here a little early. Let's just hit on these 3 points again. Always consider access. That one's crucial. Make sure you got roads to your forebays. Make sure you can get your folks out to your green roofs to properly clean them. What else? Make sure your pavers are in areas that are not secured, where you're not going to have to go to war just to get folks in there to clean them out. This applies to all your facilities. Know the contributing drainage area and site conditions. This goes beyond just drainage, though, and knowing the social uses of that area and how those human-based activities might be impacting the future maintenance and success of your facility on site. It's hard to do. You can't always do it perfectly, and there's always going to be unforeseen issues with our sites, but do the best you can when you're speccing these facilities to be built. And last but not least, ensure the design makes sense, build to the approved plan, and sequence construction correctly. Build a spec, make sure your materials are cured, make sure you have the right materials on site, and make sure your landscape plan and plants are correct. So if that means getting construction admin on site as part of your construction, or if that means getting a landscape architect out there for a couple hours just to make sure they've got the right materials in place, please do so. It'll help us out greatly in the end. So thanks a lot. We've got 15 minutes for questions, if you have any. I can't answer everything, but I'll do what I can, and what I can't answer, I will look up for you. Or you can Google it yourself.
Well, I'm just kind of curious, you said you're doing a lot of retrofits and replacements on it. So what are you typically swapping out, and what are you using? What do you like to use instead?
For the concrete and stuff?
Well, just, you said in general you had lots of projects, and
Okay.
lots of retrofits and lots of replacements,
Right.
but you didn't go into detail.
Okay, so detail. So for permeable surfaces, typically what we've installed with retrofits is the precast concrete. Yeah, we have a contract with them, but the jury's not out on that. It's a new tech that we're trying out because it seems like the other stuff isn't working correctly. That doesn't mean it's the silver bullet for the problem. For retrofits for wet ponds, we're doing dredging, obviously, and in the riser structure, we're installing those low and mid-flow drawdowns so that when we draw those facilities down, we can get to those forebays. Those retrofits also include access to the forebays, major pond structures, and underwater forebays, not like stuff that's gonna sit with it's not gonna sit dry. It'll always be underwater. Retrofits for dry ponds include installing new or larger trash racks, and also turning them into enhanced extended detention dry ponds, as long as they're not in line. That's obviously an important part. So that is more from a functionality and a water quality benefits perspective that we're doing that. Our peak shaver dry ponds do require a lot of maintenance because of the number that we have, but frequently that's much simpler, just goes down to dredging it out. But we're installing these enhanced ponds now because that's kind of the way things are moving with stormwater, the science of stormwater in general, getting that phytoremediation, those native plants in place. For the, it's got its benefits and its drawbacks for sure. What else? Green roofs. We're not really doing too many retrofits with those, mostly repairs. So repairs to the plumbing and replanting as necessary. bioretentions, obviously you saw getting our elevations correct and mostly extensive replanting. Bioretentions are tough because if they retain water, we don't get the proper infiltration rates, then it doesn't matter what you've got spec there, it's not going to make it plant-wise. So a lot of that. What else? Other facilities were you curious about?
I was just wondering if you were kind of like getting rid of certain types and replacing with a different type.
Yeah.
So you're just basically kind of fixing the problem.
Yeah, we are replacing some of those old like permeable asphalt. We're phasing that out because, like I said, that correct spec is so small and tight, and every single one of those facilities has failed infiltration tests. So we've got to try something. Yep.
Simple, just basic question. Which facility is the easiest to maintain? Like, which ones do you guys like?
Dry ponds? Wet ponds, yeah.
So you
Wet
guys
ponds.
like ponds better than any of the other ones?
Underground. I love underground.
You like underground detention?
Underground detention, proprietary.
Yeah, I think we gotta rethink all this. We got these great books, how to do it, but like you said, it's not working.
Yeah.
I think it's just not a one-size-fits-all, and that's how it's been rolled out. So, when we went to the West Coast to tour their municipalities, because we heard that's the best. They're the model. Seattle and Portland, they got it going on. They've been doing GI for a long time. We went out there, and they're really not doing anything different than we are. It's just their weather is different, and their soils are different, and it just works there. Whereas here, we have, 85% classier, worse soils.
Yeah.
So infiltration with an it's just not really a great application
Doesn't
for us.
infiltrate.
So the storm tech system is probably the better one to use.
Isolated rows and storm tanks. That's
Well,
underground
those are
detention.
new to us too, and we're wondering how
Like
we're gonna
those?
maintain those.
You have to
Rock
flush
bottom.
them, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. We'll see
we
how
got
that.
another port.
Yeah.
And we're not
We'll see how that
right
works.
now.
Sand filters are also good if you have appropriate pretreatment and they're designed correctly. So that's important though. We have a sand filter that I maintain that doesn't have either. It's not built correctly. Well, it's built correctly, but it's missing a couple components, and there's some pretreatment, but it's not sufficient. And that's just because the amount of junk coming off the site, I guess you could say, just the amount of hydrocarbons that are going into the system overwhelm it.
It's old school though.
It's old school. Is it not state of the art?
Storm filters and
Yeah.
bay savers, and those are similar.
Yeah.
I
It's
think
from
we
a
just
maintenance
bought
perspective.
The wrong facility type at the wrong location. So the one that John's talking about, I think it was over $1 million rehabilitation project that we implemented at the Newington Solid Waste site. And that's where they park all the trash trucks. And so you have all that trash juice that leaks out. And what we didn't account for was the biofilm that grows on top of what we should, which should be open and free for infiltration. And so we've gone in, every year or every 6 months?
Every 2 years.
Every 2 years and completely rebuilt it.
Replaced all the media in it, cleaned out the forebay, settling basin, all that stuff. And it has hydrocarbon filters in the inlets as well. So it does have some pretreatment, but I think that was a site selection issue, and it might be properly sized for like a Walmart parking lot, but because of the nature of that facility, it just gets overwhelmed.
Yeah, so I think we're still open to those. I mean, sand filters are old school, but they're still in the clearinghouse. It's still something that we, would definitely want to utilize. I think in this application, it was just it could have been a better full separator. Something else on the site would have performed better. So we're open to non-GI, but that's kind of all you hear. And that's what you guys need to do on your sites to get the site where it needs to be for development.
What happens is my client says, I need this plan approved. And once you get it approved, I don't care what you use, it's approved, and then it's somebody else's problem later.
Oh, it's always that way. Yeah, it's always that way.
The book says I can do this, and so that's what we do.
Yeah, I don't have a solution to that, but trying to be open with things from our perspective, what happens at the end of the line once we get a hold of it after that process has occurred. So.
Because ultimately, the owner of the site is going to have to live with it forever. And so, being the design engineer and guiding them through the reality of what, forever.
Well, what the thing though is that the county would take it over and have to maintain it.
No, that's not true at all. We would get it to a functional status, put a lien on the property, back charge with a 30-day turnaround on the invoice, and it's still your problem. Yeah, we do not take over facilities like that. That's just not a fact. Our enforcement program, we've never taken on a facility. We have a pilot program in place to transfer private facilities into the public inventory, but we're only approved for 5 transfers in their ponds within residential areas. We would not take any commercial drainage under that program, assuming that it was implemented countywide. And just transferring in and of itself is very time consuming, it's very expensive, we have to get the land rights, there's attorneys involved. We've successfully transferred 1 facility in probably a 4-year time frame. We're helping another community get the facility up to functional before we take it. We're embarking on another capital improvement project with another community to get the facility up to a functional status, but there's a cost share requirement associated with that. We're not just outright letting folks who fail to maintain it get away with that. It's not an equitable approach to implementation of a program like that. So that's a misnomer, right? Yeah.
Any other questions? All right, well.
The urban fire retention, the ones that they usually got curbed around it.
Mm-hmm.
Usually in areas that they're kept up pretty good, just for aesthetics. So I imagine you probably don't have a whole lot of problem with those.
I don't think so. No, they so far so good. Yeah.
If it's confined within, some walls, it's typically pretty good.
All right, well, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Good luck with traffic. Sorry.
Yeah. I think he told us what we needed to know a couple times.
Nice meeting you. Yeah, nice meeting you. Have a good day.
I'll send a reminder email to your.
Well, I see Gupta, and I know that I hear that name all the time on WMAL.
Interesting to
hear.
Yeah, I will send a reminder email tomorrow morning.
Oh, okay.
Because I did my job because I'm supposed to do this.
Yeah.